Good morning. Makeshift gavel this morning. Welcome to the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency and Marlette Lake Water System Oversight Review and Oversight Committee. This is our third committee. Thank you all for being here and sticking with us, being here so early. We really appreciate your time today. Today we will be receiving a presentation regarding the Marlette Lake water system and then presentations focused on transportation and economic development issues in the Tahoe Basin. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Senator Scheibel?
Here.
Assemblywoman Cohen?
Here.
Assemblywoman Krasner?
Here.
Senator Settlemyre? Here. And Chair Peters?
Here, thank you so much. We have a quorum, and I'm going to go ahead and go over some housekeeping-ish things like we do, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. I know most of us have been through this a couple of times at least, but I want to make sure we are all working from the same baseline. Agenda items may be taken in a different order than listed. 2 or more agenda items may be combined for consideration. An item may be removed from this agenda, or discussion of an item on this agenda may be delayed at any time. Members who are joining virtually, please be sure to keep your video on so we can know if we have a quorum. And please also be sure to mute your microphone when you are not speaking to minimize background noise so we can hear everybody. We are generally a paperless committee, but I left my computer at home today and I'm working on my tiny computer, so I have my papers with me. I'll recycle them. However, most committee members will be looking at their computers. I included will be trying to pull up our presentations on my tiny laptop, so bear with us if we're not looking directly at you. It's not a sign of disrespect. We're just trying to follow along. Sometimes the screens are a little small. We will have public comment period at the beginning and end of the meeting. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker to ensure everyone has an opportunity to speak. Members of the public may provide testimony in several different ways, all of which are listed on the agenda and include to call in. You may dial 669-900-6833. When prompted for a meeting ID, enter 851-4772-2022 and press pound. Broadcast and Production Services, or BPS, staff will indicate to you when it's your turn to speak. If you would like to provide written comment, please either submit them electronically during or after the meeting by emailing tahoe@lcb.state.nv.us, or you may mail them to the Research Division at 401 South Carson Street, Carson City, Nevada 89701. Alternatively, you may fax in comments using the number 775-684-6400. You may also provide testimony in person, either here in the Legislative Building in Carson City or in Grant Sawyer Building in Las Vegas. Finally, I would like to remind members to please turn off your electronic devices. I just muted my computer and put them on silent mode during the meeting. My intention is to run through the agenda, so please feel free to leave the room or your computer if you need to take a quick break. I also have a little bit of a time scenario. My daughter has a performance today at 3:30, so I'd like to get out of here in time to make that in Reno. So I appreciate everyone hanging in there if we have to kind of move through some items quickly today. With that, we will go ahead and move into public comment. Public comment is the first public comment period for the day. An additional opportunity to make public comment will be available at the end of the meeting. Please remember to state and spell your name for the record and limit your comment to 3 minutes to ensure everyone has a fair opportunity to speak. I would like to first call for public comment for people who are attending in person. We have someone here in Carson City. Please go ahead, state your name for the record and proceed when you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kyle Davis, that's K-Y-L-E-D-A-V-I-S, and I appear today on behalf of the the League to Save Lake Tahoe on this one. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in public comment today. Wanted to make sure to put this on the record, as I'm not sure I'll be able to stay for the entire committee. 2 years ago, this committee recommended, and then the legislature passed SCR 8 to prioritize transportation projects and identify funding barriers in the Tahoe Basin, and to make recommendations back to this committee and to the full legislature. I've been proud to be a part of the bi-state consultation process on transportation for the last 5 years, and a lot of work has been done by this committee in that time, and you'll hear later today about some of the work that we have been doing. One of the main things that you'll hear about is this 777 process, the essentially a division of responsibility for the projects that we've identified in the basin. We've, by going through this process and prioritizing what are the most important things, both for the economic health of the basin as well for the environmental health of the basin, as it relates to transportation, we've identified about projects that are the total cost of about $20 million. And what the 777 concept is that it divides that responsibility, $7 million to the federal government, $7 million to the state governments, and that's both states, and then $7 million to the local government. And obviously the local governments and local businesses and residents. And so that part's going to be the hardest part to come up with, and there's still a lot of ideas that are being worked on. We still have a lot of work to do to really get to these solutions and get to the place where we've got what we need to make sure that we have the transportation system we need in the basin so that everybody can continue to have, you know, a world-class experience in the Tahoe Basin. But it's taken a lot of work to get to this point, a lot of agreement among various different people. So I want to commend the work of the bi-state consultation process. Look forward to this committee hearing their report and want to continue to keep working on this issue so that we can get to those solutions, we can fund them, and we can actually accomplish the goals that we've identified. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Appreciate having you here. Is there anyone else in the room in Carson City who would like to come up for public comment? Seeing none, I will go ahead and ask anyone in Las Vegas and Grant Sawyer, please approach the dais if you would like to provide public comment. Sometimes people hide behind that post in the room. I don't see anyone coming up. I'm going to go ahead and ask BPS, would you please add, check the public comment line and add the first caller to public comment if there is one.
Chair, the line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
Great. Just as a reminder, there is another opportunity at the end of the meeting to provide public comment. I will go ahead and close agenda item 2 for public comment and move on to agenda item 3. This is an update regarding current operations and capital improvement projects concerning the Marlette Lake water system. It's my understanding we've had a little bit of turnover or anticipating a little bit of turnover at the system, so I'm excited to hear how things are going. Personally, I really like to hear about what's going on at the Marlette Lake system. It is a novel system in the state of Nevada and really in the West, and a cool and continuously operational water system that I always appreciate hearing how things are going and what you guys need from us. So please state your names for the record and proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Kent Lefevre. I serve as the Interim Administrator of Public Works. And joined with me here today is Mr. Dave Dutra. He is the Deputy Administrator over Buildings and Grounds and over the Marlette Lake system. And I will turn the time over to him for this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kent. Madam Chair, distinguished members of the committee and guests, it is my pleasure to continue what we started in February 15th, which was an overview of the Marlette Lake water system, the historical significance of the system, major components of the system, as well as discussing recent improvements to the system. Just to remind the committee and guests, this is a system that was originally formed in 1873, later improved in 1877 to accommodate the mining industry in Story County. So it is of significance historically. Today's presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about the statutory guidelines that enable us to operate the system, operational updates, current operational updates as we transition seasonally. as well as capital improvements, projects that have been completed, capital improvement projects that are currently underway, those which are proposed, and operational needs for the facility. Statutory authority is granted under NRS 331.160, which governs the operation and the fiscal manner in which we manage the systems. The statutes require that we provide adequate supply of water to the areas we serve, those being Carson, Washoe, and Story counties, and to maintain and improve and to modernize, under the statutes, the systems. It requires that we sell the water in an equitable fashion, fiscally sound manner under contract arrangements with the municipalities that acquire the water or purchase the water, as well as issue obligation bonds and revenue bonds such that we can improve the facility through CIP projects. And we also established an enterprise fund which governs our staffing and how we equip the operation to ensure daily operations, sufficient daily operations. Seasonally, the startup activities begin in late May, early June. It's quite substantial, and this is the period that we are in currently. You could imagine the operational challenges, as this is a high elevation system ranging from 6,400 feet to 8,900 feet. So as early as May, we begin chasing the snow line up the summit and work to improve the roadways and drainage systems that we manage, as well as check for connectivity through our operating systems, and a great deal of just visual inspections of those component parts. So shown here is a photograph in the winter system, or winter season, as well as the summer season. Also our power facility, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So this year really was no different from any other year operationally. The challenges included clearing deadfall and trees that quite often during the winter months prevent us from accessing the facilities, as well as the snow load itself. So we spent a great deal of time cleaning that. Clearing and restoring the seasonal tributaries and the catchments is essential to preserve water quality or maintain water quality, the clarity of the water. These catch basements shown here allow the water to settle out. The solids, the suspended solids are able to settle out, and it improves water clarity. So during the winter months, our employees receive training, ongoing training, and receive certifications while they start up spring operations, which include safety equipment, inspection of the 3 dams, the Lakeview tank, 27 miles of roadway and piping ranging from 8 inches to, that should read 24 inches in diameter, as well as looking over our fixed facilities, such as the Ash Canyon Reservoir, a 3.5 million gallon above ground tank, and other related facilities that I will also touch on later on. And clearing debris out of our catchments and making sure that the pressure reducing air boxes are operating sufficiently. We're checking rolling stock, our log booms, clearing spillways. So there's a great deal of work before we start up what we call the pumping season. So a few of the more significant CIP projects that have been completed would include the development of the generation building, introducing the Supervisory Control Data Acquisition System, or SCADA. You'll hear me refer to SCADA. And that is a system that allows us to remotely operate the control systems or flow of water. East slope catchments were installed. The Diversion Dam thermoelectric generator was installed. We now have 3 of those in place. These are natural gas operated generators, thermoelectric, highly efficient units, as the system does not have any power, traditional line power. So Marlette Lake site improvements include included also a new 230 horsepower fully submersible pump. Yes.
I apologize for the interruption. Could we turn the, thank you, we have some tech staff in here to help us with this, just for our online folks and their ability to see your presentation. Thank you so much. Sorry again,
No,
would you
no
mind
problem.
repeating your name for the record and proceeding?
Sure. Yeah. For the record, David Dutra, Deputy Administrator for State Buildings and Grounds, which includes Marlette Lake Water System. So we were talking about prior capital improvements that have been completed, and now advancing into capital improvement projects that are currently underway. Those amount to the Marlette Lake Dam Rehabilitation, the Hobart Dam Rehabilitation Project, the Diversion Dam Project, and Marlette Lake Inlet Structure, and I'll talk a little bit more about that and show you some photographs, as well as the adding additional catchments on the east slope. So certainly the most significant project would have to be the Marlette Lake Dam Rehabilitation Project. And this consists of components which include the existing condition of the dam, its seismic stability and structure, the dam's outlets, both primary and secondary, that's the spill of the water, as well as the emergency spillway, control monitoring systems, which is, again, the SCADA system, and also access roads to the dam. Now, the dam is it holds back 11,370 acre feet of water, so it's quite a substantial structure. Shown here in these photographs, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but so the necessity for the project was identified in 2018 through the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection's Safety Inspection Report, which called into question the use and continued use of certain aspects of the dam, those being corroded and cracked piping, outdated controls, the structure's stability, as well as undersized spillways. So that's what this project focuses upon. So you may recall in 2017, we had a significant snowfall, which overwhelmed the spill with 18 feet of snow that had to be dug out by hand, short of creating an ice dam, which would prevent the lake from spilling in the event we had significant and quick melt-off. So that was something that we had to address right away. It was also called into question through NDEP's report that it was undersized. So we are going to increase the size of the spill as well as enclose the spill to prevent ice dams from forming and snow from blocking the spill. One of the other aspects of the project is to construct on top of the dam a fully secured, controlled SCADA system monitoring facility. So this is an enclosed structure with full security systems, including televised monitoring, and this will allow and improve our control of the features on the dam, which are currently manual. We will be able to do that remotely from our offices. Another aspect of this project includes improving 5 miles of the North Canyon Road from Spooner Lake into the dam site. We're going to be improving the grading as well as drainage. One of the other capital projects that's underway is the Hobart Creek Reservoir Dam. This is a dam which stores 200 acre feet of water. And it is a structure that in 2018, NDEP also found similar concerns that we had with Marlette Lake Dam, citing the dam's project as a requirement to improve certain aspects. Currently, we're awaiting funding through FEMA with documents filed with the Nevada Division of Emergency. The Marlette Lake Upgrade is a project that it's a relatively new structure that sits on the floor of the lake, and we're looking to elevate that off the lake floor about 4 feet. Currently, right now, we're experiencing increased particulates or abrasive sediments that are pulled into the system. That's wears on the pump mechanisms. So we're looking to take this structure that you see here and elevate that approximately 4 feet off the lake bottom, which will improve, again, the turbidity, lower turbidity, improve clarity of the water. And so that's an important aspect. And that project is currently underway. It's in design right now. The diversion dam metering system, which is a project that is now fully designed, will incorporate SCADA on the east slope of the system. So we'll be able to remotely operate those systems on the east slope, as well as provide for an improved surface to park equipment and maintain the diversion dam, and add metering capabilities. So we'll be able to better control our water management through that system. The Ash Canyon Treatment Facility remediation cleanup project, or really it's kind of a decommissioning project of the former treatment facility that the state used. We're going in to remediate and clean up the warehouse structure, remove old unused equipment, and ready that facility for alternative use. Currently, Carson City utilizes a 3.5 million gallon above ground tank, as well as a reservoir in that area. So that is essentially those CIP projects that are underway. This next slide identifies capital improvement projects that are needed. We discussed adding additional catchments, and those catchments are necessary to collect waters that naturally flow in the area, as well as 4 other independent projects that all consist in replacing the water line itself. You can imagine it's a 145-year-old water system, so the piping is of concern. All of these projects would range between $30 and $40 million to complete. Our last slide here just discussed quickly some of the significant operational needs. I mentioned the pumping season. We have a 12-cylinder naturally aspirated natural gas-fired motor, which provides electricity to the submersible, 230 horsepower pump motor. So that motor runs continuously from July 1 until November. So it accumulates a lot of hours, and the bottom end of that motor needs to be rebuilt at a cost of approximately $500,000. In addition, we're looking to replace some of the rolling stock equipment that's used to maintain the system, as well as provide security fencing around the corporation yard, which also houses our offices for maintaining and operating the system. So that completes our operational update and the update of the CIP projects that are underway. And at this point, I'll turn it back to Mr. Lefevre.
Kent Lefevre, Deputy or Interim Administrator for State Public Works. Thank you, David, for that presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for the presentation today. I know a number of us are new to this particular treatment process. Are there any questions on the functionality of the system from the committee? Wanted to make sure folks understood what we were talking about, especially with the CIPs. So we've seen those come through a couple times in my tenure here. All right, I don't see any questions related to those things. Are there any other questions related to the presentation from the Marlette Lake system? Not seeing any from the committee. I have a couple. My first question is how close, so you talked about FEMA funding for the Hobart Dam. Is that funding for finishing the design pre-construction, or is that to complete to construction or through construction?
Thank you for the question. Kent Lefevre, Interim Administrator. The FEMA funding is for actually the construction and to finish the design. We have some state funding that we're using right now to elevate the design to a certain level. And then the additional federal funding will kick in to finish that and do the design. We are still waiting to hear from FEMA, and we expected to hear from them basically any day now on whether we're approved to move forward or not. So fingers crossed. Thank you.
We are playing the waiting game with federal grants right now.
Yeah.
How about construction timelines? Can you give us an idea of what we're looking for construction timelines, start to finish, on the three massive construction projects on the spillway, dams, and what was the inlet? Maybe was the other one.
So we have the three primary construction projects, as I would see them: the Marlette Lake Dam Rehabilitation, Hobart Dam Rehabilitation, and the Diversion Dam project. It's my understanding that the Marlette Lake Dam project would commence, the construction of that would commence in 2024. So we're still, it's at this point, it's 60% completed in its design phase. Hobart is about 35% completed in its design phase. So it still has to go through peer review, obviously permitting, and so that's going to take some time. And then there are seasonal restrictions. Obviously, up there, we have a short window of construction, and that further delays those projects, or can.
Thank you for that. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, since this Kent Lefevre, Interim Administrator, since many of the committee have not been up to see the site, we would offer invitation to conduct a tour at a time that would be mutually convenient for the committee. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that invitation. I was hoping that would be extended, and if it hadn't been, I was going to request one. There are some folks in our body outside of the committee who might be interested in attending that as well. The system really is quite beautiful up there. We've gone up for day trips and had a picnic in the right off of the dam up there. My husband, he got an archery tag in that region, so he goes up there and camps during those periods, and it's really quite stunning if you haven't had the opportunity to go. So we will get that scheduled up and get some folks up there to see how cool that area is, and check out the system and talk a little more about how novel the system is. Are there any other questions from the committee? I think that was my those were my questions. I don't see any others. Well, thank you again. Thank you for the invitation. We'll follow up with you on getting that scheduled. I appreciate your time today. We will go ahead and close agenda item 3 and move on to agenda item 4, which is an update on the Lake Tahoe Regional Transportation Plan and the Tahoe Metropolitan Planning Organization. There are a few folks here, including Julie Reagan. Just Julie today. Please state your name for the record and proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Peters and members of the committee, the staff, and the public. I am Julie Reagan, and I am Chief of External Affairs and Deputy Director at the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, which I'll refer to as TRPA. Also in the audience is Nick Haven, who runs our transportation program in our long-range planning office, as well as several board members. So we're all here at your disposal to answer questions should you have them. I'm going to begin by talking about the big picture of transportation. It is the majority of the items relate to transportation today on your agenda, and I wanted to give a quick overview of some of the governance issues, including our regional transportation plan. And if you think of the big picture as you get really mired in a lot of detail today, I wanted to start painting that picture for you to remember that at the end of the day. I had the great pleasure of taking a group of University of Nevada, Reno visiting scholars from Europe on a hike to the lake last week. It's so wonderful that we get to bring delegations from other countries back now, post-pandemic. We at TRPA take great pride in doing that in a cultural exchange fashion. And I was just explaining to them how the transportation network is intrinsically connected to the quality of the water in Lake Tahoe. And so if you think of roads as the conveyor belts that move sediment and polluted stormwater runoff into the lake, and also the actual quality of the roads and the degradation of the roads as tires grind particles down, that ends up in Lake Tahoe and it affects the clarity. So what happens on the land affects the water. It also is a greenhouse gas issue, and so trying to reduce congestion and traffic affects our climate goals. So big picture, that's really why it matters, and there are other reasons related to TRPA and our governance that it does as well, which I'll shortly get into. So really, in looking at the overall governance, it's helpful to understand that there are many players in transportation, and the transportation system is such a top priority for TRPA and for our many partners who you'll hear from today. We've spoken to you many times in this body around the many transportation elements, the alphabet soup of agencies really, but for the benefit of some of the newer committee members, if you'll indulge me, I wanted to start with looking at our bi-state compact, which we'll be celebrating the signing of that compact later this year, 53 years ago now. The compact created two agencies governing Tahoe's transportation system. TRPA is a land use and transportation agency. We adopt a regional transportation plan for Tahoe's bi-state region and a regional plan that integrates land use policy with approaches for Tahoe's transportation. And that is very unique in the United States. It's usually bifurcated. So the compact, the framers of the compact saw that connection inherently in our goal to preserve this beautiful place. Notably, the Bi-State Compact mandates that we adopt policies to reduce dependency on the private automobile. So back in 1980, when the compact was amended, it included this provision. So transportation has long been recognized as a policy directive for both states that are parties to the compact, the state of Nevada and the state of California. So our plans in Tahoe must prioritize transit, trails, and other non-car modes of mobility. And to TRPA's role, we are authorized by the federal and state laws. More than 20 years ago, TRPA has also was nominated as the Tahoe region's designated MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization. I think we're the smallest populated area in the country that got that special dispensation. So our 15-member governing board, plus the addition of the United States Forest Service as the largest landowner at 78%, constitute that MPO governing body. It's a federally mandated and federally funded transportation policy-making organization. And that, too, was a bi-state decision of the two governors per federal statute in '99 when Senator Reed and our delegation fought to get that special MPO status for Lake Tahoe. So the significance is that Tahoe, as a bi-state region, is now eligible to receive more federal transportation funding than would normally be possible. And importantly, the regional transportation plan that we adopt has to have reasonably foreseeable funding to make the projects eligible for federal funds. And there is currently roughly a $400 million shortfall in our current adopted regional transportation plan. And the Bi-State Coalition and the work of the Bi-State Transportation Consultation Group that you'll hear from today has been actively engaged, as your earlier public comment speaker, Kyle Davis, mentioned, for 5 years to address this funding gap. Tahoe serves millions of visitors a year on our transportation system, but for decades we've been classed as a rural or small MPO, funded only on the basis of less than our 60,000 permanent residents, with some special dispensation to recognize a portion of our visitor population. So this dichotomy between our small year-round population and the 15+ million annual visitors we serve is truly the heart of the problem that we need to solve in transportation, scaling up to meet that peak demand on our holidays. The compact also created the authority for the Tahoe Transportation District, our sister agency at TRPA, who you'll hear from shortly. The compact's final article, Article 9, established TTD to help implement our regional transportation plan. And this unique role that TTD plays is really important because also we both have this cross-jurisdictional authorities. It's important to note that TRPA and TTD are not the only transportation agencies and authorities in Tahoe. Like other MPOs, TRPA works hand in hand with many implementing partners to carry out our mission. For example, Douglas, Washoe, and Carson City in Nevada, Placer and El Dorado County in California, and the city of South Lake Tahoe are very key transportation implementing partners. We have both states' departments of transportation, Nevada Department of Transportation, Caltrans, many other state partner agencies, as well as federal highways. US 50 is a federal highway that runs from Sacramento, California, all the way to where I grew up in Ocean City, Maryland, across the United States. So it is a complicated jurisdictional landscape in transportation. Add to that, we have many private transit operators, and you'll hear a snapshot of some of the very exciting activity around private sector contributions to transportation today. Something that's supporting microtransit, as it's called, Uber in a van at the South Shore that's launching very soon and has been working successfully, TART Connect on the North Shore. So there's many partners. Tahoe's transportation needs are heavily influenced by areas surrounding us, and looking at the metropolitan areas of Northern and California, Nevada, and Northern Nevada and Northern California, it's no surprise that we're under pressure for our transportation network. Our major areas of influence from outside the region extend from the Bay Area in San Francisco area, through Sacramento to Tahoe, onto Northern Nevada. And even Southern Nevada and Southern California residents have second homes in Tahoe and visit our area even for day trips, what we found throughout the pandemic. People were driving much further distances to escape either the heat or to get to the great outdoors. From the Bay Area to Northern Nevada alone, there's a combined resident population of 15 million people who are within a day's drive of Lake Tahoe. In addition, we include our workforce in our core transportation system needs. Because of home prices that are out of reach for the ordinary worker in Tahoe, more and more workers and services are supplied by those who must live outside of the Tahoe Basin and commute in and out. And much of what you'll hear today addresses the struggles of commuters on the Nevada side who perhaps live on the south end of the lake, have to go through the 28 corridor to get to the North Shore, or to get to other points of employment through that peak congested area. And that is a huge challenge that we're trying to solve collectively as a partnership. So surrounding metro areas are growing rapidly, and on the basis of rising population alone, we're stressed, not to mention rising temperatures. A recent study through the Tahoe Advisory Science Council showed that as temperatures grow over 100 degrees, just on the Echo Summit coming into the basin on the California side, traffic will double if it's over 100 degrees in Sacramento and in other areas in the valley. I can witness that this morning as I left that area, my home in Christmas Valley. People were already coming in. It's going to be over 100 degrees today in the valley. So it is a respite that we provide in terms of an escape from the heat in Tahoe. So how we manage our transportation networks is critically important to our local residents' quality of life, our commuters, our recreational visitors, and the visitor experience for our economy, but also the lake itself. And so how do we serve these transportation needs and allow public access to the incredible bounty of public lands that we offer, but not ruining the resource in the process? And that's it. Fortunately, we've adopted plans to fix the problem. Every 4 years, TRPA and our partners, in our capacity as the MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, we update a regional transportation plan, and currently that was done in 2021. It's the 2020 Regional Transportation Plan, which is a $2.4 billion investment program, capital and operating expenses. And when you really drill down into the basics of that program, you'll see a true emphasis for what we call in transportation speak, active transportation, and that is non-auto modes of transportation, trails, transit, getting people out of their cars. And why does it matter so much? First, we need to reduce greenhouse gases to support our state's climate policies. And certainly second, we have the policy mandate in the compact to reduce dependency on the private automobile and prioritize trails and transit. And it's just a great opportunity that we have to link our land use decisions with compact development and concentrating development through our regional plan to support transportation investments. And that's what we've done with the update of our 2012 regional plan, which we will celebrate a 10-year milestone this December on that 12-12-12 anniversary of the regional plan update, which was so very important to both of our states. So just a few quick notes on our overall framing of what we call the RTP, Regional Transportation Plan: trails, transit, technologies, and community corridors. In terms of trails, we're making incredible progress on bike and pedestrian facilities. We're adding on average 5.5 new trails per year, making Tahoe more walkable and bikeable, as the regional plan really demands. We've added 28 miles of trails over the last 5 years. We've named the Tahoe Trail that connected path, and our goal is to be able to circumnavigate the entire lake off-road in a dedicated, what we call a Class 1 trail. And there are different sections that have had some great progress. I'm sure many of you have been on the East Shore Trail between Sand Harbor and Incline Village. That's a signature achievement of the Environmental Improvement Program and all of our partners. The Spooner Front Country up on 28 is making great progress, and we have a corridor plan across the entire 28 corridor to link up, to fund and to increase our capacity to move people out of their cars, to better park them, to increase safety. Transit is perhaps the hardest nut to crack, as we are known to say in Tahoe. The operating funds necessary for transit is a huge challenge with our small rural population. Today on the routes that we can serve, we often have an hour service limitation and not a seamless connection from North to South Shore. We are seeing some improvements in the microtransit service that is exciting for us. But our vision and our aspiration is to have this year-round transit service so that it is connected and it is seamless and is possible for folks to get to a bus stop and wait no more than 15, maybe 30 minutes, and to have dedicated times, free and frequent, and dependable service is our vision. We'd like to offer our visitors the opportunity to arrive and then park their car once and be able to get around the basin without the use of a private automobile. And to have the trains, or to have the trains someday, hopefully, but to also have the trails necessary to move them around. So, as I mentioned, we are working very diligently. In addition to transit trails, technology is a piece that we're looking at improved communication. People can pick up their phone and get most information in a lot of resorts now. We have some applications under development for, we call it travel demand management, where people could actually have real-time information about the ability to park in certain locations, the ability to get around congestion. There's opportunities there, so that's the third T of the trails, transit technology, and community corridors, which we'll be talking about a great deal more in detail. And so with that overview, I wanted to just, again, thank this committee and the state of Nevada for the commitment to the bi-state transportation consultation, which we'll get into more detail about. It couldn't be more important for the future of the lake, particularly as we continue to grow and evolve as the backyard for our communities of Northern Nevada and Northern California. And you will be hearing a great deal more from Carl Hasty, the district manager of the Tahoe Transportation District, and Alexis Hill, Washoe County Commissioner, TTD Board Chair, and our TRPA Governing Board member. So I will be happy to answer your questions, and then if not, I will turn it over to my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Ms. Reagan. Are there any questions from the committee on, yes, Assemblywoman Cohen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about the buses. Did I hear you say that the plan is that buses are going to be free?
Yes, member, thank you for the question. Julie Reagan, TRPA for the record. We have actually been able to go to free transit service, and my colleagues at the Tahoe Transportation District will get into more detail. We were able to do that pre-pandemic because of some investments from local jurisdictions and some new grants, because what we've noticed is that transit ridership dramatically increases when it's free. In addition, frequent and fun. So the plan would be to keep it free. The collection of revenue is complicated, creates a lot of challenges. The microtransit service right now that's been launched on the North Shore, TART Connect, and will be on the South Shore, will be free as well to encourage ridership. But that is a challenge. The funding is only identified in pilot phases for a few years in some of those instances, and that's part of the solution that we're trying to come up with to continue the funding. But my colleagues can probably provide a lot more detail than that.
Thank you. And then may I have a follow-up, Chair?
Yes, please.
Okay, and then I don't know if you want to answer this or I'll put this out there for your colleagues, but the percentages of ridership now, is it commensurate with the numbers of residents, the small number, the percentages of residents versus the percentages of tourists? Does that line up with those numbers of who's in the basin, or is it skewed more to one or the other group?
Thank you, Assemblymember, for the question. Julie Reagan from TRPA. I will say we anticipated, I will give the North Shore TART Connect, which is been wildly successful. We anticipated a lot of our visitors. The numbers were bearing out to show that there is a fair number and probably a majority of local riders, commuters that are using the service, and just local residents. So it was a bit of a surprise, and that's part of the success of these pilot programs, of us better understanding the user patterns within the transportation network. And we have a lot of marketing to do to get the word out. Another challenge that we've found through market research is that because we have a very complicated transportation network, a lot of people are not familiar with the opportunities available, what transit services are there. So we have a very focused effort around marketing to let the consumer know that we have these services as we roll them out. And as I said, we can drill down into a lot more detail for you because it's very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Are there any other questions from the committee members? Go ahead, Senator Sotomayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was kind of curious with the increase in traffic that we're seeing in Tahoe, hearing from my constituents, if we could have a little bit of a discussion, and maybe the next speakers as well. It seems that the traffic totals have literally just gone off the charts. We're seeing levels that we've never seen at Tahoe, and anecdotally, I'm being told a lot of that is related to COVID, meaning that people are tired of the cities and they want out, especially on 100-degree days, which everyone's tired of those. But in that respect, we've seen just an unbelievable increase in the traffic levels at Tahoe. Is that correct?
Senator Sotomayor, thank you for the question. Julie Reagan from TRPA for the record. I would say it is correct in certain areas. What we particularly saw during the pandemic is that our public lands were where the biggest hotspots were found. The traffic was different. It was a different traffic pattern than we've experienced. So where people might have been in more restaurants or the casino core in the past, with those facilities being closed, largely during the pandemic and the height of it, those folks went out onto the trails. And so we had much more crowding in our corridors, on shoulder parking, and in hiking trails and mountain biking trails. So the public land usage really skyrocketed. Overall, I think traffic is up, but it's not out of character. It's just the concentration of the areas where people were parking and using facilities was actually not just overcrowded, but overwhelming. And that is what I think the local residents have really reacted to. I know my neighborhood and my colleagues, it's very difficult, to even be able to go out and enjoy anything in the peak summer season as a local, because it's just, it's being experienced by many people. This summer, I will say, and we'll hear from the Visitors Authority later, who have probably some excellent data for you. It seems like this July 4th being on a Monday, we were all really bracing for the impact because the last couple of years have been very, very, very crowded with traffic. It seemed a little bit more akin to a normal July 4th, which was busy, but not, again, in this overwhelming status. But Senator, your question is good, and I'm sure we can dive more into stats for you and get any information that you need to follow up. But in general, things are busy, but I think we're seeing the shift of where people are congregating is really the biggest change that we've noticed.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for the question. I know for our family, it's been hard to make the trek up there, not knowing where we'll be able to park or what beach will have space enough for us. And I look forward to my children being old enough to really take the public transportation and utilize that. I like the free part. I don't carry cash. It's really difficult for my family to use transportation that requires a cash payment. So I appreciate that movement too. I think that resonates with a lot of folks who are local in particular, but trying to make it up to the lake to enjoy it as locals. And, are there any other questions from the committee? I'm looking forward to the next discussion. Thank you so much, Ms. Reagan, for your time today. And developing kind of that baseline of where we're at. All right, we're going to go ahead and close agenda item 4 and move on to agenda item 5, an overview of activities, programs, and priorities of the Tahoe Transportation District. Please go ahead and state your name and begin when you're ready.
As soon as I find our presentation.
When you get the presentation up, we'll check and make sure that folks online can see it too before we get started.
Great. In the meantime, I'm Alexis Hill. I'm County Commissioner for District 1. That means I represent Northwest Reno, Southwest Reno, and also Incline Village and Crystal Bay. So very excited to be the new chair of the Tahoe Transportation District and also a governing board on TRPA.
Good morning. Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Carl Hasty. I'm the district manager for the Tahoe Transportation District, and happy to be here with you today. It would have even been more fun if we'd been up at the lake, because we could show you some of the very things that were just being talked about, and be a great way to see what's going on there and what some of the solutions are. So I look forward to the future when we can do that. And if there's any time you guys would like to do that individually or as a group, do not hesitate to reach out. So, starting today here.
Real quick before you get started, I'm going to check in with our folks who are joining us virtually. Can you see the presentation yet? About now? Yeah? Great. Okay, please proceed.
Okay. Okay, just as a refresher for those of you who don't know, I know Senator Settlemyer has been on a number of committees, so he knows this well. We are established at the same compact as TRPA. Article 9 is our authority. Nevada revised statutes will find us in the same place as TRPA because that's where the compact is located, is NRS 277-200. We focus entirely on transportation. We were created to be similar to the equivalent of the regional transportation commissions that the counties have. Actually, we were created about the same time as the RTCs. So our job within the compact is to focus entirely on transportation, and that covers the gamut for the region. We also have the authority to, inside the basin and outside the basin, to go outside for purposes of connecting Tahoe. And that's really what we work closely then with TRPA and the other entities to do that. It's important to know, and you've heard this before, but with that public land ownership, we have 90% if you throw in the lake and the fact that the lake is controlled as a reservoir by the Bureau of Reclamation. That really is more public ownership and control than anything else. High demand, small urban area, and that makes it very challenging from a transportation perspective to have the lake in the middle of that. We are also part of what has been termed the Sierra Pacific Megapolitan Region. So we've got 14, 15 million people within easy day drive up. And Senator Settlemyer, to your question, what I think we're also seeing is people's willingness to stay in traffic longer and to be in a tighter space when they're on that beach with other folks has also, I've watched it over the 30 years that I've been up there, evolve and change.
If I could, Madam Chair, it's kind of the right time to ask. One of the things I was looking at is, after being a seasoned veteran on this committee for far too many years, a long time ago you did a report that showed that about 80% of the traffic at Tahoe, as far as visitors, came through the Reno airport. And I was curious if you have any information showing how that has changed over the last couple of years, or if you still think it is primarily coming through that.
Yes, we did some assessment to see out of all the major airports out of the Bay Area, Sacramento and Reno, where people were coming through. And not surprisingly, Reno was a big one. We have not had any updates on looking at kind of evaluation of that, but we know it's still a significant player in terms of distant visitors coming to Tahoe, typically then having to rent a car and then coming up and enjoying it as they do. So the Reno airport plays a big role. All right, so notice of here, we've got about 10 million vehicles or more or less coming in. That's a big job for us. And I'm including 70,000 people in population here because it's important to understand that we have a very close relationship and interplay with what's called the Resort Triangle, which goes to Truckee and the 80 corridor. And they behave very much like Tahoe does. A lot of second homes, a lot of ski resorts, and people who are going there are also going to Tahoe. So it's important for us to be thinking about that from a transportation perspective. These are some of the major projects and services that we focus on. I'm not going to go through each one of these. I'm going to focus primarily on the 28 corridor. But these are the types of elements that are important for the future and what we're looking to accomplish. On the 28 corridor, what we would have been showing you in a field trip is the circumstance there. Julie noted the first segment of that bike trail that's been constructed. TTD put that project together, got it through the environmental process, got a lot of the funding there in place, worked with our partners, and NDOT took on the responsibility of building that project, which was fantastic partnership and worked well. We are now focusing on the next 8 miles from going to Sand Harbor to US 50. We do have some transportation dollars to put to work to there. We've put in for a number of grant opportunities. We did receive an earmark, small earmark for that, now that those are back. So we've got more work to do there. And here's some opportunities that we look for in things like our projects. You know, the Incline Village General Improvement District has an opportunity here, if we are able to get the money in time, to co-locate the replacement export pipeline for their sewage effluent, which now resides in 28 itself and can present a real difficulty when they have to repair it, stop the highway, et cetera. NV Energy is extremely interested in undergrounding their power line along there. Given today's climate fire situation, there's now a lot more opportunity and cooperation with energy to do so. Fiber connections, that's a policy, dig once. We also have a very rural communication system, which is not always as responsive as it needs to be when we have that urban demand up there. So NDOT, TTD are all looking at how we can expand both the ability to get fiber optic into there. And then, so a lot of transportation upgrades. We're focusing on Incline, for example, to put a mobility hub there. It's a series of mobility hubs. We're looking at another one at the junction of US 50 and SR 28. A series of those is what's part of the plan, to be both in the basin and out of the basin so that we can connect folks and give them alternatives. Congestion is one of the big things to address in 28. We've got a very cooperative effort underway with all of the public entities, NDOT, state parks, Forest Service. There's a lot of folks who have different responsibilities for managing that corridor. NHP, the courts, when it comes to enforcement and ticketing. So there's a real partnership effort that's been underway for quite a while in order to get some new facilities in there, get people to be able to park off of the shoulder, get some seasonal transit there, and provide a safe way for them to walk so they're not walking on the highway itself and using it as a sidewalk. This is our board of directors. We have a board of 14 that are comprised here on this list. We have 2 governor appointees. We have the private sector on our board. We have the local elected officials from all the 6 jurisdictions that make up the Tahoe Basin. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Hill, who is the new chair of TTD, and I will man the slides.
Thank you. One of the things that I love about being on the TTD board is that we need to collaborate, and as Joanna Marquetta would say, epically in Tahoe. And the projects that we do at TTD, I think, show that epic collaboration, and we're very proud of the over $100 million that we have invested in transportation projects. And some of those projects have been Meeks Bay to Sugar Pine Trail, Dollar Creek Trail, the East Shore Trail to Sand Harbor that we've all been talking about today, the Tahoe City Fanny Bridge Project, the first roundabout in the Tahoe Basin at the intersection of 28 and SR 431 at Incline Village. So many exciting projects that we have been able to work on, and we look forward to really further investments, which we'll talk about later in this project or in this slideshow. Obviously, there are transportation challenges in Lake Tahoe. So we have small communities in the shoulder seasons, but we receive a tremendous influx of vehicles during our peak seasons and our special events. And there is a dependence on vehicular travel. There was a question about visitation, and the most recent visitation statistics that we have is 42% of visitation is day use from adjacent communities in Nevada and California. So I think that shows how important it is that we figure out how to get those day users in public transit and make a really fabulous public transit system. So we obviously have all other issues, these congestion issues up at Lake Tahoe. We only have a two-lane road, four-lane road in some instances around the lake. And we're not going to be expanding those roads. We're not creating a bridge over Lake Tahoe. We actually need to reduce the folks driving around the lake. So we're looking at vehicle miles traveled that is actually creating water pollution and declining our lake clarity, which is one of the biggest things that we're so proud about with Lake Tahoe. And we have fire danger. We need to figure out how to evacuate folks when there is fires. If there's a lot of vehicles up at Lake Tahoe, and I think we saw this with last year's fire, we can get into some trouble. So plus, we have a lack of affordable housing, which you'll hear about later today. So we have folks commuting up to Lake Tahoe for their jobs from Carson or Reno on the Nevada side that aren't able to afford to do that, especially with gas prices as high as they are. Our most recent study was about $500 a month that they would need to receive in additional pay. We know that that has gone up significantly with the cost of gas going up. So also with representing Incline Village and Crystal Bay, I think we also need to consider the quality of life for folks traveling within their community, our resident community. We're also seeing not only additional folks coming up to Lake Tahoe to enjoy the lake, but we're also seeing folks moving full-time to Lake Tahoe, more people living in these small communities full-time, and that has been an adjustment, and additional vehicle miles traveled within those communities as well. But with all of these challenges, I can envision a really fabulous transportation system, a way that all of these issues can be fixed. So I envision mass transit from adjacent communities, so from Reno or from Carson, all the way up to Lake Tahoe, so you can drop your car there. And then, and that's really where almost half of our visitor travel is really coming from. And then the first and last mile will be utilizing our microtransit programs, which Washoe County has invested this year $100,000 into microtransit for the first time. And we'll be seeing year-round microtransit and evening microtransit. So we'll be seeing our ski folks also using microtransit. And then also our CIP projects, completing the 28 trail and having folks being able to use micromobility and pedestrians safely getting around the lake and recreating. So we can envision it. How do we get there? So delivery of transportation is different in Tahoe. As Carl had pointed out, we are not a traditional RTC that can levy sales tax. We do have an opportunity that we can levy a tax, but it has to be general and uniform operation throughout the region. It's very difficult for TTD to levy our own tax. That's something that we need to work on. And additionally, California has had the TDA, and that's been investment since 1971, where they've returned to their jurisdictions, their local jurisdictions, funding for transit. So Placer and El Dorado County, as well as South Shore, receive funding from the state of California for the federal match that we receive, the federal grants for transit through TTD. We in Nevada do not match that. I think that there's an opportunity that we can look at doing that, and I know that our local jurisdictions also want to see how we can step up to the plate and support those matches. I know that this vision is really beautiful, how we can pull together this transit program, and I think that you can tell the complexity with the 5 counties and 1 municipality in 2 states that govern Lake Tahoe. So we are now at a very focused time to figure out our transportation system funding gap. And as many of you maybe experienced, we did in 2019 and 2020, TTD did do a study, the One Tahoe Plan, which looked at a single source of funding, which would have been a basin entry fee to get into Lake Tahoe. That's not something that is a silver bullet. It seemed like a silver bullet solution, but it's not something that is quite feasible yet. We see in our local jurisdictions and in both states. So with the 2020 update of our RTP and our threshold update, which essentially says that we need to figure out how to transform our transportation system around Tahoe, or else we cannot, develop the lake further. We have seen this 777 sector approach, and it's very, very exciting to see the local governments coming together. I'll tell you what, Washoe County, we are at the table and very excited to fund transportation, and we like that the 7-7 approach on the local level isn't telling us how we need to tax our citizens or figure out our portion of the funding. We as a local jurisdiction can decide where that comes from ourselves. So I think that gives us a lot of flexibility and shows that collaboration that we're the very exciting point of collaboration that we're at both on the state level, the federal level, and the local level. So the use of the funding gap revenue for the Regional Transportation Program, the RTP, we're really looking for matching funds because for capital and operations up at Lake Tahoe. So to finish that last part of the Highway 28 trail and so many other connected corridor projects around Lake Tahoe. And we really have to use local funding to leverage our state funds for these capital projects. So that's another opportunity for locals to step up, and we are willing to do so. And on the TTD front, we really need general funding support. On the state level, TTD is asking for a sub-grant through TRPA until we get our 777 program up and going. We are asking for a grant to help us with our operations because TTD does not have a general funding source. We have no sales tax revenue, and we as an organization need to be strong, have staff that can implement this $20 million project. So that will be something that you'll be seeing coming down as well from a request from TRPA through TTD. So in the short term, we are asking for general fund support for TTD and then capital and operations for the Tahoe transportation plan. And in the long term, I think that there's opportunity to see how can TTD have more flexibility to help ourselves gain revenues. And so there may be a possible BDR in the future for us to look at. But we're really excited because with the current taxing authority that TTD has, if we were able to implement our taxing authority, we wouldn't even be able to reach the funding gap that we have for transportation projects, which is that $40 million a year. It would be about $6 million. So we need to look at all of these options of locals, the state, and the federal government coming together. And with that, all of that information, I'm Alexis Hill, and Carl and I are here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Are there questions from the committee on this presentation? Can you talk a little bit more about what the 777 breakdown looks like and who will participate in each area and where those folks are in an agreement to participate in those fundings?
Madam Chair, Carl Hasty, District Manager for the Tahoe Transportation District. We'll definitely will be speaking to that a lot more in the next item. And so we're just kind of doing a little bit of transition here with our presentation in order to lead into that. So we'll be happy to get into great detail on that, as well as give you an update at that time of what the Tahoe Transportation District Board has been doing relevant to tackling those sectors.
But
Fan.
sorry, Madam Chair, we have had, through TRPA and TTD, many hearings on the local breakdown, I will tell you, just on the local perspective. And overall, the localities, the local jurisdictions around the lake are open to what their spend will be. And even counties like Placer are looking at spending more than what their requirement would be, their local match would be. So I think that is the exciting part, because we can't have this functional transportation system without the locals coming with our general fund dollars.
Sorry for jumping the gun. Thank you for that redirection. I'm obviously looking forward to this conversation. I can appreciate the general fund support, and I hope it's clear to the committee that your funding currently is really project-based, and so there's not a consistent level of funding for you outside of those project-related funds that support your administrative work. And the request is really to help build that the professional nature of what you do, and make sure that you're supported in the writing of grants and other things that you can spend time on to make sure those projects you mentioned are implemented. Is that a correct kind of surmise?
Thank you, Carl Hasty again. Yes, Madam Chair, it would really give us a foundation that is not what we have now. We've been very fortunate to have the run for as long as we have here. That really kicked us off was a set of discretionary earmarks that came through TRPA that allowed us to get into this, as well as opportune when the transit system was in danger at South Shore. TDD was in the position to be able to step up and to take it on and not have it go down. So we have been very creative and very assertive of how we can play the discretionary game and try to build a small general fund, but it is not a reimbursable type of situation. So we are now finding ourselves kind of at the extent of how we can operate under the current model, and this is why we are seeking some kind of baseline that would be of great assistance. So thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Are there any questions before we move on to the next item? Great. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I want to go ahead and close agenda item 5. Move on to agenda item 6, which is an update on the Lake Tahoe bi-state consultation on transportation and list of transportation priorities and projects for the Lake Tahoe Basin prepared pursuant to Senate Concurrent Resolution 8, SCR 8, which we talked about earlier from the 2021 legislative session. We have a couple of folks coming up today to discuss the status of this. Please introduce yourself and go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Jim Lawrence. I'm Acting Director for the Nevada Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. With me, you've already heard from Julie Reagan, and I also believe on the line on the Zoom is Brian Cash, Deputy for California Natural Resources Association. And also presenting on this item will be Carl Hasty, who you just heard from. I want to say it's just a pleasure to be here. I don't think I have been in this building since pre-pandemic, so it's good to see all of you in person. It's a pleasure. Some of you have heard a lot of this before, but I do want to dive into a couple of things that have been said earlier, particularly regarding just why it is so challenging to get a transportation system up there that works for everybody. And you've heard some of the numbers. Senator Settlemyer talked about visitation from airports, and yeah, 80% of airport people driving by air, they're coming through Reno. A lot of people driving from car, coming through all of the different entries. One of the best decisions I made in my life was to move to Carson City in 1991 from Eugene, Oregon, and I was a commuter from Carson City to South Lake Tahoe for 7 years because of the housing issues and because of the cost. We have a system that is basically hits a tipping scale during peak demand of recreation areas. We have a commuter system. We have people that depend on getting up there for their work. We have a lot of folks coming in from the Carson Valley and Carson City to South Shore. My nephew is a painter, and almost all of he lives in Reno, and all of his jobs are in Kings Beach and Reno and in Klein Village. So it is such a mix of use and transportation up there that it makes it very challenging. One of the questions that I get asked quite frequently is, why is the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources diving into transportation issues? And I know that Mr. Cash, California probably gets the same question. And I will say that between the two states, we have had a very good, strong working relationship that keeps getting stronger ever since we worked on the regional plan update in 2012. So the two cabinet members with Secretary Laird at the time, with my previous boss, Secretary Kroll, decided to tackle the transportation issues at Lake Tahoe to see how we could help. And the reason doing so is obviously you've heard of some of those environmental problems, the water quality issues. When you don't have a good transportation system, you actually have an increase in fire danger. We have greenhouse gas emission targets that we want to hit. But even more so than that, when I look at the state of Nevada in particular, we, just like California, we claim ownership to the bed and bank of the lake. And Lake Tahoe is one of the primary drivers up to the region. So we are part of the problem of having people come up. We also have our state park system up there. For those of you that are familiar with Lake Tahoe on the Nevada side, between Highway 50 to the south and up to Incline Village, that is almost all public land. Not all of it is state land. In fact, most of it is Forest Service. But Spooner Lake, which is the southern bookend, as I call it, and Hidden Beach is the northern bookend. And so we have many, many visitors coming up to recreate. And we have a responsibility to give them safe, quality recreation. But on top of that, I know folks that live in South Lake, and I know folks that live in Incline Village, and they commute back and forth. And in the summertime, in particular, they cannot get to their jobs because there is so much traffic going into Sand Harbor that it is basically a backlog. And so for a region that is responsible for quality recreation, quality of life, plus a $5 billion economy, that's the reason why the two resource agencies decided to get involved. So if you want to go to the next slide. So we set up the bi-state consultation about 5 years ago. And we've gone through what I think of as two iterations, phase one or phase two. The first time we got together in round one, we made tremendous progress. We were able to focus in different areas of where we think we should be the highest priorities. We identified technology as an issue because we have a changing economy, a changing transportation system that is dependent on technology. And Mr. Hasty talked a little bit about the broadband challenges up there. We looked at the issue of peak recreation and what that does to the system and what it does to congestion. So we identified priority corridors, the East Shore corridor, like I just talked about, the Emerald Bay corridor on the other side. And we recognized the need that there are so many multi-jurisdictions that we need to have frameworks in place that bring all of those partners together to make sure that they're making management decisions holistically and for the greater good. We also looked at collaborative planning documents. The bi-state consultation weighed in on the California Rail Plan. We weighed in on the Nevada Rail Plan because we know while it's not a short-term solution and a lot of work needs to be done, when we look at reducing single-use vehicles coming up to Lake Tahoe, particularly from the Bay Area, that rail is part of the equation. We also looked at public-private partnerships, and there was agreement that this is not solely a public endeavor, that the private side will have a large responsibility and has a great role in doing this. And you will hear later about the South Shore Event Center and what they're doing regarding microtransit and providing that for the visitors. We also had a long discussion about is it fixed lane bus routes, which is kind of more traditional, or is it more microtransit? So as you have probably surmised by now, microtransit is seen as one of the better solutions in order to get people to where they need to go. So that's the South Shore Transit you'll probably hear more about later on. And then you certainly heard about the TART Transit on the North Shore between Placer County and Incline Village. And what it does is it gets people more directly to the places they want to go because folks don't really want to go and wait typically at fixed lines. So, with that, we moved into phase two of the consultation, and I want to really thank this body for the time and attention you've given to this issue over the years. Last session, you passed Senate Concurrent Resolution 8, which basically, gave approval and endorsement for continuation of the bi-state process, but also, this is why we're here today, is you requested, okay, where are we at 2022? What are the priority projects? What are the benefits? How are we looking at equity? What are some of the barriers to implementation? And what is the funding strategy? You just had a little bit of a discussion on the funding strategy, and then I know it'll be talked about a little later in the presentation, but I do want to dive into that a little bit. That was a big breakthrough of the last round of the bi-state. Certainly with so many multiple jurisdictions and up and down local governments and then federal agencies, state agencies, there was a desire for sort of one fungible single source. It's a little easier to implement when you don't have to really track the color of money everywhere and you have one source that can be used for multiple purposes. There were various ideas that were discussed and explored thoroughly. I think those still will be explored moving forward, but at this point in time, some of those single sources had both certainly there was a lot of questions, regarding equity. There was a lot of questions regarding legal parameters that need to be looked at, constitutionality, and that needs to be looked at moving further. But there was a recognized need that we need to do something now. And so that's where the 777 framework came up. For those of you who have been around, that is the same strategy that we used successfully for the Environmental Improvement Program. When the Environmental Improvement Program, which was a large body of projects that needed to be completed in forest health, water quality, recreation, aquatic invasive species, the shares for those coming up with the funding was split amongst the federal government, state agencies, and local governments and private sector. And we've been very successful. We have raised more money for the EIP. Nevada, in large, thank you to this body for approving our EIP bonds. We have been able to use that strategy to successfully bring money for necessary environmental improvements to Lake Tahoe. So that was the strategy that was landed on by the bi-state consultation. And in many ways, it was a breakthrough because, as you heard from Commissioner Hill, the local governments are all on board and have embraced the concept that they can dictate their own destiny by deciding how they want to raise the funds as opposed to somebody telling them how to do it. Same thing with the states. We can, California has their own authorities, we have our own authorities. At the end of the day, what matters is we bring the revenue to bear and we get the projects on the ground. With that, I know that Julie Reagan and Carl Hasty will do the bulk of the presentation on the details of the report. I would like to just hand it over to Brian Cash to maybe say some words regarding a California perspective, if I may.
Thanks, Madam Chair and committee members. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I just wanted to take just a short time to show California's commitment to continue to work with our partner, Nevada, on the issues in the Tahoe area and finding funding to address those needs, and especially in this case, the transportation issues. We are currently working with Caltrans to try to secure funding through grants to help with the transportation projects that you'll be hearing about later through Julie's presentation as part of the Bi-State Transportation Working Group. And we're looking at other options too to create more sustainable funding in the future to be able to help out and to meet California's commitment. So I just wanted to be here to answer any questions and to show California's commitment to continuing to work with all of our partners on this. And I'll turn the time over now to Julie from TRPA to do the bulk of the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, staff, and the public. Again, I am Julie Reagan, and I am the Chief of External Affairs and Deputy Director at TRPA. And really appreciate the chance to dive in a little deeper, building on the previous speakers and our introduction. As Acting Director Lawrence said, we're here to report on the Senate Concurrent Resolution 8. You may recall many of us and our partners here testified in the session to support this, to really call attention to the great need around transportation, and to put a fine point on the projects that will get us to these outcomes that we are looking for to really envision that transportation future that puts Tahoe in the world-class transportation area. We have a world-class resort. We have absolutely one of the most spectacular places on the planet to visit. We have an abundance of public lands, but in many respects, our transportation network is third world. And that's really the purpose of the work that's underway. So we're going to walk through how this report, which you did have in your packet, and there are hard copies available. We have a more detailed report that breaks down detailed information on projects on the Nevada side of the lake for you. So I encourage you to breeze through that when you have the opportunity. We will provide you with some highlights today, including how the report addresses the specific areas of the resolution to talk about benefits of the projects, the overall project list, metrics of success, how it addresses climate change, issues of equity and access, and then recommendations for funding. So taking us back to the beginning, we'll just go back to the compact. And as Director Lawrence said, the resources agencies have historically now for 50 plus years been the keepers of the compact. And that entails the partnership that is epic collaboration, as we like to say, to get these things done. And transportation has always been envisioned as an essential element of that investment for the future of the lake. And so we are required to do this regional transportation plan and to prioritize other modes of transportation. And that is a very difficult thing to do. The framers were brilliant in including this in the compact, but when you look at the land use pattern that really the highways were formed at the advent of the 1960 Olympics, then at Squaw Valley, now Palisades, Tahoe, it was a road-dominated culture. And that was, the era of vacations and resorts. So we created Tahoe with this road, auto-dominated infrastructure, and we have to go back and change that. And that's very expensive and it's very challenging to do. As I said at the beginning, what happens on the land affects the water. Transportation equals water quality. And that is sometimes hard to get your arms around. As Director Lawrence said, transportation is its own entity, but that's what forces the partnership. I will say the work that we're doing has been very closely coordinated with NDOT in the state of Nevada. The state, as you well know, is going through their own process of an advisory working group. TRPA is most pleased to sit on that working group to look at funding shortfalls for the state as a whole. And the state as a whole is looking to fill $500 million of an annual shortfall with gas tax receipts going down over time. And that is a big problem to solve for the state as well. Our $400 million is over 20 years. So we're looking at a $20 million annual shortfall, which then equates to that roughly 777 share that you've been hearing so much about. But keep in mind, these investments are certainly good for the environment, good for the economy, good for the community. But when it comes back to our overall mandate, it really will help us achieve our clarity goals and our other environmental measures that we are mandated to maintain and achieve. So you've heard a great deal about the challenges. I don't need to belabor the point. I will emphasize safety, particularly as I mentioned NDOT, as safety is certainly top priority for our transportation partners. But we are at an untenable position, and Senator Settlemyer, I really appreciated the question because we do have this feeling like at any minute something terrible could happen on the roadways because of the congestion and this redistribution of attention on our public lands and trails. People have discovered the great outdoors. What we have found in these last few years that we've always been, of course, an outdoor recreational mecca, but those folks who might have gone to Disneyland or Six Flags or other parks that were shut down discovered camping and going hiking and biking. And that has created this really big change in how traffic is clustered. And that is part of why we went to these corridor approaches for the east shore of 28 in a holistic fashion, really state line, South Shore to state line at Kings Beach and Crystal Bay, and doing the same thing on the California side, really around the entire Emerald Bay corridor, all the way down to the Y and Camp Richardson. So looking at these corridors and really addressing things like safety, equitable access, it is an imperative with the abundance of public land that we have access to public lands, and not just access for people of, able to mountain bike and climb tall peaks, but people in wheelchairs and people who have disabilities. And that's difficult in the constrained network and infrastructure that we have. So that's something that we're really taking a hard look at. So looking at trail segments that are equitable in terms of their access, we are actually, through our regional transportation plan, doing our first ever equity study. And our transportation team is working with the TTD and with our many partners in the community to interview people about access. I'll give you an example. We've installed some beautiful facilities of trails, but in the winter they're largely inaccessible. And I've cringed driving on Highway 50 with a person in a wheelchair trying to get by on a trail that wasn't plowed. So we're looking at operations and maintenance to really focus on how can we keep these trails open year-round? And that is an expensive proposition, but it's really necessary if we want to achieve the vision that we are for access for all. We've covered transit and GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, emergency response. Certainly during the Caldor fire, we covered that topic in your last gathering. Evacuating 30,000 people in under 4 to 5 hours was a feat. We did that successfully with no injuries, but we have limited capacity to do that, and that's where transportation really does spill into other areas like emergency preparedness and public safety. Our local businesses are at the table for transportation, and that is the success of our environmental improvement program, that public-private sector, because if folks may tolerate traffic to a greater degree, at the end of the day, there will be a tipping point where if it takes 10 hours to get to Lake Tahoe from San Francisco, it might be easier for those folks to go somewhere else. So it's an economic interest as well as an environmental interest. Safety, 15 people have lost their lives on these corridors, and that's the 28 corridor, the Highway 50 corridor, think Zephyr Cove, the same situation. We are addressing that. One thing we haven't covered in this discussion is the fact that investing in transportation also brings good paying jobs. We had done a study of our environmental improvement program that every year 1,700 jobs are supported by the EIP as a whole. And that's everything from transportation to watershed restoration to forest health and fuels reduction. But investing in this way not only helps our communities and the environment, but it also brings economic benefits to the area. Notably, Sand Harbor is one of the top attractions in the state. No surprise, it actually was the top attraction, I think, in 2021, and it really recognizes like a third of revenue overall for the state in Spooner and Cave Rock and Sand Harbor, and visitation is a huge consideration for the state. We've covered equity a good bit. I will say this trail segment that you see here, there's a new trail segment that was just dedicated, which has access for people of all abilities physically on the South Shore. It's the Dennis Machida Memorial Greenway Trail, and we just had a dedication for that a couple of weeks ago. And it also connects our community of the Sierra Tract on the South Shore to the community college. And so students now are using that, and commuters as well. And that was designed over a sensitive wetland area. So we've proven that we can build these trails in an environmentally sensitive manner, also improving access for all. So whether it be walkers or bikers or folks with different levels of activity. Barriers. The resolution looked for us to talk about the barriers to implementation, and you've heard a great body of evidence around this. But workforce shortages is absolutely poignant this year, has been for a number of years, this year in particular. Businesses are not able to be open because they do not have the staff, and I know other areas around the state have experienced the same thing. At cost of housing, you're going to hear from the Tahoe Prosperity Center around that. I won't belabor the point. I heard it said in our community once, Tahoe has always been a resort, expensive place to live, certainly. But before the pandemic, we went to sleep, we went to bed as Tahoe, and then we woke up 2.5 years later as Aspen or Vail. The prices have skyrocketed to such a degree, rental and for sale prices. So this is having all sorts of effects on our workforce, on our local citizens' quality of life, on the ability of people to live, forcing more commuting, which brings more congestion and more greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles. So this is all being analyzed as part of this report. One thing Notably, the broadband support infrastructure, we've made a request for a number of federal grants through the Economic Development Administration. We have some that are pending to get more support to build our infrastructure in the area of broadband and Wi-Fi. Over the July 4th weekend, voicemails might have taken 3 days to show up on people's phones because there was so much stress just from people being here, and calls were dropping left and right. So these are things that we all know and are working toward to address. One area that has emerged and will continue to be worked on, it did just come up in our bi-state consultation meeting yesterday with Cabinet Secretary Crowfoot and Brian Cash, who you heard from earlier from California, Director Lawrence, and many folks in Nevada, was parking. Again, the complicated landscape of jurisdictional areas makes for confusing parking policy. And what we're trying to do as part of this consultation and implementation through our action plan of transportation is get a regional strategy for parking. We have private facilities on the South Shore that charge for parking in the casino core. We had a meter program that then was recalled through ballot initiative in the city of South Lake Tahoe some years back. Placer County is doing a wonderful amount of research on parking for the North Shore, really from the West Shore all the way over to Kings Beach, and have some pretty interesting pilot programs that they're looking to roll out in the coming years. But what we've found, particularly during the pandemic, is that one policy implemented in one jurisdiction has implications for the neighbor. So, for example, when public lands had to close during the fire danger and beaches at Lake Tahoe, for the first time in history, were closed because the Forest Service, the fire danger was too high and the capacity was not there to maintain the facilities. That just pushed demand into private areas surrounding there. So we have a plan, it's called Destination Stewardship, that we're working through to address more consistency around all of these policies, particularly parking, and trying to get our arms around how to best provide access, but at the same time, change behavior, because over time, we do not have the roadway capacity to just see continued upticks in parking in our corridors. So we're looking at some interesting research to say, how can we shift that behavior and incentivize people to do shuttles? And that is a big part of the focus of this plan, in addition to real-time traveler data. So I will note that within this transportation action plan, we're looking hard and being aggressive in increasing our electric vehicle fleet. We took our governing board on a tour of the Meeks Bay recreation area last month, and we were very pleased to ride on TTD's first electric bus. And the Lake Tahoe Community College that's pictured in the lower area of this slide has a mobility hub that is actually able to charge these new clean vehicles. So we have an increase in stations. You can see the number of charging stations mapped around the basin. We actually won a national award for our Tahoe Truckee plug-in electric vehicle readiness plan. So we are being very bullish as a partnership, a public-private partnership. Many private sector non-governmental agencies like the Tahoe Fund, for example, are raising money to support this. So we're continuing to be aggressive with an electric fleet in Tahoe and to encourage that as part of this. So before I transition over to Carl Hasty, who's going to jump in here in just a moment, I wanted just to, again, ground you with the big picture of the regional transportation plan, and then that's the pie on the left, the full regional transportation plan, to almost $2.5 billion. And then this 20 million annual sliver that you see blown up in the larger slide is really the sustainable funding source that we're trying to fill. And the breakthrough with the bi-state consultation was identifying this 777, a third partnership in the model and the spirit of the EIP, where each partnership sector identifies how they will come up with an annual target of $7 million a year. And the breakthrough has been real. And we were encouraged yesterday to hear, for example, transient occupancy tax, TOT ballot initiative going on El Dorado County's ballot this year to bring more money into the basin for transportation. And that always, is a heavy lift for any tax measure in California with a 2/3 requirement. So this consultation is actually inspiring more action on the ground at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. We're pleased to report that we were able to receive a $2 million community-funded and directed spend from our delegation, from the federal delegation for Highway 28, to invest in that whole corridor. New parking facilities. The Forest Service is busy with the engineering to put new parking facilities off-road to support that corridor implementation. We also were receiving more money for transit, and we have several outstanding coordinated grants underway. The state contributions, the $7 million for the states, that would be a 2/3, 1/3, $4.5 million annually for California and $2.5 million annually for Nevada. So that will be explored more in this presentation. And then the $7 million annual target for local governments, that's all local governments. That's the city of South Lake Tahoe, Washoe County, Douglas County, Carson, El Dorado, and Placer, as well as the private sector, which is making substantial contributions to transportation. So wanted just to ground you with that bigger picture before we dive into the projects, because it's one thing to say that we need more transportation investment, but then we need to know, well, to what end? These are the projects that we want to invest in, and that's what our report really dives into for you. And I will now turn this over to Carl Hasty from the Tahoe Transportation District to keep going with the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning again. Carl Hasty, District Manager for the Tahoe Transportation District. So I'll take you clockwise around this illustrative map. We talked about SR 28 in the last presentation. This is definitely a priority project to complete that 11 miles along there from Incline Village to Spooner Junction, to get parking off of the highway and then to safe designated parking locations. Another part of the solution I would point out, and it was mentioned here earlier about parking management, and it was also relates to Senator Settlemeyer's question earlier, is it's one thing to have transit and trails, but when you have an abundance of free parking somewhere, that's not too much incentive for folks to get out and shift to another mode, and that's just human nature. So what we've seen and know from very successful mountain resort communities around the West is that parking management, parking, paid parking, and so on are incremental to successful transit system. And when a community like Park City, which is a pretty small community in Utah, can get an annual ridership on transit of 2 million, and people park at once and are able to walk and take transit, and it's no fare, and it's easy to use, you really see a very broad spectrum of the community, visitor and resident, utilizing that. That really is the desire for us at Tahoe, and we just have a larger scale kind of challenge of doing so. But we're starting to tackle this on places like the 28 corridor, as well as down the South State Line. Regional transit service is another aspect of here, which starts with places like 28 seasonal, but the idea is to reconnect to Carson City again directly, a connection that we have lost over time, and to get more interregional. NDOT is now doing a corridor evaluation of which we are all participating in for the rest of 50 from Spooner to South State Line. There is a series of improvements that will be coming out of that. And just like the 28 corridor, the SR 89 corridor, one thing I would like to share with you and highlight is Tahoe has learned, and the EIP was an excellent, the Environmental Improvement Program fostering of that cross-silo solution-oriented approach that we need to do, and now it's being applied much more so to transportation. So to address issues along like the 28 corridor or any of our corridors, that really means we have to get to cross-jurisdiction solutions. So everyone has to be involved. It's no longer adequate for NDOT to focus just on NDOT's right-of-way as solutions, or the Forest Service on their property, or state parks on theirs. And so this is what we are continuing to evolve with, and being successful at doing so with some of the improvements that you see up there and what are planned on this list. Getting to US 50 at South State Line, that's a very, I call it actually our single largest mobility hub at Lake Tahoe. And the whole redevelopment vision from the 90s has been about making that more of a destination where you do park at once. You've got a high concentration of bed base, you have a high concentration of parking, and we are now doing more to get trails to connect into that, to connect to the mountainside and the Bi-State Park, as well as to the lake. So you have the event center, which you'll be hearing more about, that's going on in there right now. And ideally, where we get with an approved project that has been through the process, is where we can move to actually make the current core through that commercial area a local street and realign some of US 50. So those are some of the areas that we're working on here. As Julie noted, the Dennis Machida Memorial Greenway, that is a transformation of an older concept for transportation, which was going to be a highway for which Caltrans had purchased the right-of-way from the community of Myers to State Line as the beginning of a 4-lane highway to encircle the entire lake with a bridge across the mouth of Emerald Bay. So this is where the compact began to change that and move us more into a multimodal solution, and the Dennis Machida Memorial Trail then is a good example of that. As been noted many times, what we're calling the SR 89 recreation corridor, there around Emerald Bay is another focus area that's important. And then lastly, kind of finishing out the circle at the top, is the Fanny Bridge project. And if you haven't had the opportunity to drive through there in the summertime, I suggest you do it, and you'll find out why we call it the Fanny Bridge Recreation or Project, because everyone likes to look at the big fish at the mouth of the dam, and so they tend to lean over the rail to do that. That's a very old bridge. It's more than 90 years old, and it does not accommodate bicycles well, and it only has access for pedestrians on one side. So this project actually realigned a small segment of SR 89, State Route 89 in California, which took a lot of traffic off, and is going to allow the old highway segment to become a local street and tie much more so into Tahoe City there, and become part of a better commercial and visitor experience as well. There, as noted on the transit side, which are not necessarily denoted on the map except for this broad regional transit, is the idea and what's been happening underway here with microtransit to really integrate with our fixed route service. Lastly then, kind of closing this out, we'll get to our cute little graphic here about, we're gonna have the slide for the little thermometers. All right. So our focus here, as noted, is on the 777. We rounded up because it made a lot more sense. And this is where we're going to focus here on the sector. So the next move is to move into implementation and focus on that. For the TTD board, and as Commissioner Hill noted in response to Chair Peters' question, the TTD board has been focusing primarily on that local private sector aspect and how that's going to get accomplished. I am happy to say in my since 1991 experience at Tahoe, you know, the 80s, the 90s, even the early 2000s, when it came to transportation, the primary focus was on water quality retrofit of roads. What this effort has done in the last 5 years of bi-state effort has really helped, I think, us shift the focus of transportation to the same kind of, as I noted, cross-silo, focusing the collective number of organizations, which are all the public works departments, the 2 state DOTs. I mean, in all, there's about 11 entities who implement transportation at Tahoe. This process has allowed us to start to be thinking more regionally and acting more regionally, and I'm looking forward to continuing to foster that. So this local private sector component is kicking into gear. On the state side, particularly with Nevada, since there's a focus here, so be looking at how do we accomplish the $2.5 million annually. Nevada already has at least 2 bond authorities in place, which have not been oriented necessarily, at least EIP has not been oriented on transportation per se, but now has the opportunity to do so. So that's something in an area where, you know, we've been working here with Acting Director Lawrence on looking at match funds for like 28, for example, to leverage federal dollars. The Conserve Nevada program is another one that does have a set-aside authority inside that for trails at Tahoe. So that's another one. Direct appropriations for kind of transit services through state parks, even the TTD, as I noted about the potential of restoring a connection, direct connection to Carson City. And then basically it's just increasing state support for existing and new competitive grant programs. We are all getting used to the new federal transportation bill and infrastructure bill, and what that means and what that can do for us, not only at Tahoe, but in the state. So that kind of activity there. So with that, I think we have kind of covered the ground, and be happy to answer any questions or if you have any other comments.
If I may, Madam Chair. And thank you. I mean, Carl did a great job talking about Nevada. Sure, I did want to shine a little bit more light on that. Regarding the Environmental Improvement Bond Authority, I mean, this body has been gracious and sponsored our EIP bond programs in the past, and certainly I know our Nevada Division of State Lands Administrator Charlie Donahue. He coordinates that EIP program. He presented earlier to this committee. They are looking at the transportation needs largely along SR 28 because it does have those environmental impacts. And when we're even funding recreation projects like at the Spooner Front Country, we're looking how does that tie into a transit system. So wanted to make this body aware that we do, moving forward, like Carl said, we didn't really look at EIP for transportation. But now we see such a strong nexus that we're looking at that as a place to go. The Conserve Nevada program was Assembly Bill 84 from the 2019 legislative session that you may all remember. That was a $217.5 million statewide conservation grant program. Within that bill, there is authority for $5 million for the state line to state line bike path. And so we're looking at those dollars largely to help out with that along the SR 28 corridor, along with trails on the South Shore. Carl Hasty mentioned direct appropriations. In the past, we have had direct authority in our state parks budget to pay for at least a share of what's called the East Shore Shuttle, which moves people from Incline Village to Sand Harbor because, as many of you know, Sand Harbor parking lot fills up by 8 o'clock. So we're trying to get people to get off the highway and take more of a shuttle system, which ties into the mobility hub that Mr. Hasty was talking about. And then, largely other than the shuttle appropriation, our bond dollars are, as Commissioner Hill pointed out, they're largely, they are infrastructure dollars. These are general obligation bonds. They're tax exempt. They are for infrastructure. There's a time frame for which those monies have to be spent to avoid arbitrage penalties. So this is going to be a great tool for Nevada to make a share, but it does leave a little bit of a hole, like Commissioner Hill said, regarding Tahoe Transportation District's operations, maintenance, and ongoing paying bus drivers and transit services and things like that, because that is not something that we can use general obligation bonds for. So with that, thank you for your time. I know this is a little bit long. I also do, I do want to emphasize that our congressional delegation for the federal share has been very engaged, and we are looking at all of the opportunities that we can through the infrastructure programs, ARPA funds, recognizing that this is an opportunity that we have to take advantage of. So the U.S. Forest Service has been to the table, and they're looking at opportunities for getting federal funds, particularly for those recreation areas. And then lastly, thank you to your staff. It's been great to work through with different changes and schedule changes and working with us to make sure we get everything lined, and staff here at LCB does a wonderful job all the time. So thank you.
Thank you for that. No, on staff, they really are crux in this building for getting things done, making sure we're staying on track and keeping up with each other. So extended gratitude. Are there any questions from the committee? I had a follow-up from our previous presentation that I forgot to ask that I'm going to ask, but I'm going to check in with committee members first on questions. All right, so my first question that I apologize for skipping earlier, what are you doing something along the line of partnerships with employers to be more flexible with public transportation use of employees? I know that this can be a barrier for some folks who have to be on the clock at a specific time, and if that shuttle is moving too slowly or the microtransit doesn't, move on time, it can hamper their ability to use that as an option. So I'm just wondering if you've had conversations with the private sector in the regions and what their reception has been.
Thank you for that. Carl Hasty, District Manager for the Tahoe Transportation District. The utility of microtransit is new, and this North Shore definitely is leading the way there. Back to an earlier question about some of the stats on that, what I think the TART system has seen has been some shift of workers who have shifted from the mainline system and utilizing that more door-to-door aspect that microtransit can do, because essentially they're going a very relatively short distance, and it's within the zone that's being set up for each of these kind of microtransit aspects. I think that is being responsive to those types of issues when, for example, that North Shore service is more like on an hourly schedule. Our schedule at South Shore is more frequent than that, but still, when you get a traffic situation and the like, there can be issues, or we don't have enough drivers and we may have to delay a service. Then the same for the fleet, because we have a very aged fleet. That can have impact. We try to maintain the connection that we have over to Minden, Gardnerville, and Carson City, because we know that there are workers who live in those areas. This is part of our interest in reestablishing a direct connection to Carson City rather than kind of the circuitous one that we have to do because of some of the funding restrictions. Those are areas that we could improve and would like to improve to be able to provide that more reliability for folks, or at least in the kind of timely ways that they need to have to get to it, to get to their destinations and back.
Madam Chair, thank you. Chair Peters, Julie Reagan with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. Just to build on Carl's response, I will say one thing not mentioned so far is that in recent years we've had a new engagement of the South Shore Transportation Management Association, another acronym, the SSTMA, and that body is comprised of largely the private sector and players such as the Barton Hospital System, one of the very larger employers, in addition, of course, to the hotel, lodging, and casino core on the south end of the lake, and working together to identify exactly solutions to the problems that you're discussing. One thing we do have, again, are the scooters. You all will recall Lime brought in bikes and scooters. People have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with the scooters. There are some safety concerns with the scooters, but I can tell you the data from the League to Save Lake Tahoe, who's been a big champion and an implementer and funder of that program, was that the biggest ridership on the South Shore for the scooters was at the shift chains at the casinos. They'd be parked at the casinos. People could get home quicker on the scooter than they could, or maybe they didn't have a vehicle, and there was congestion at the time. And so the data that we're gathering from those kinds of pilot programs and innovative solutions is really helpful to other programs like microtransit and the fixed line service, so how we can orient the system to work better. So that is progress, and I think you'll hear a little bit more from other speakers around the Transportation Management Association, because there's some really interesting work that's underway. And certainly with Barton's purchase of the Lakeside Inn and Casino on the South State Line area, that's a new opportunity to connect, I think, our community in terms of employment and transportation in the core. So thank you for the opportunity to add to that.
Thank you for that. I think it's, excuse me, it's imperative that we have everybody at the table. You guys do an amazing job with that, and I think over the last couple of years have really enhanced even those conversations, and it's really showing and how you're addressing this challenge, and I look forward to how we can help bolster that and ensure we're being as supportive as we can be for you all. I think that was all. That was the only question I really had for you. You guys did a great job of presenting the approach. Have you guys identified any significant barriers at this point that we might need to keep in mind for a bill draft request or recommendation in the next month or so? We talked a little bit about funding, bond authority, which is historic for us. Anything else that comes to mind if...
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. For the record, Jim Lawrence, Acting Director, Department of Conservation Natural Resources. You know, there are There are multiple barriers. But your question was really specific to legislative ask, and that's where it gets challenging. Certainly funding is one of the things. I think having the authorities and the recognition regarding environmental improvement bonds for the use of transportation. But a lot of the barriers, and Mr. Hasty or Ms. Reagan might have more to add, are things like technology and broadband. You know, how do you get the service? How do you get folks there? Certainly a barrier that I have heard that actually probably isn't just for TTD or the Tahoe area, it's hiring people. I mean, you can fund and put projects on the ground and put systems in place, but if you can't hire the bus drivers or the mechanics to keep them running, then they're not as functional. So that is certainly one of a barrier, and I think just that's kind of a full disclosure thing so that we're all aware that you can't put a project on the ground and have everything magically work. And then, you know, and this is where I think are one of the barriers that I think about, and this is where I think about the new Division of Outdoor Recreation and all of the work in the sustainable recreation sphere up at Tahoe. Well, it's not necessarily going to legislative fix, but just, I guess for lack of a better term, social barriers. You know, we are all very accustomed, including myself. I like to listen to my own music when I'm in the car and drive to my destination. To do that fix or that shift from why it is important to abandon your own private vehicle to do more of a shuttle system or a public transit system in order to get to my destination. That is a shift, and that is a barrier. Not necessarily a legislative fix for sure, but that is something that needs continued work. So Stu might have some to add.
Thank you, Carl Hasty, again for the record. Madam Chair, there are a couple of other things that come to mind in listening to Jim. I do not foresee them relevant to this committee, but I do perhaps next committee, and this is speaking from some kind of statutory changes. Part of, as Jim was noting, the technology aspect of this is we've become aware and looking into more things. Not only do we need to make our broadband and wireless system more of an urban demand responsive system, there's technology that can help us a lot in understanding our user base. And that's everything from license plate readers to, you know, some of the other information collecting devices that would help us with even real-time traffic information and direction to, and being able to communicate with the traveler. One of our big obstacles is being able to communicate with the traveler. There are some processes underway that we have experienced out of the Caldor fire, as well as the December snow event, which closed down everything but US 50, or US 50 was the only one that opened first, that became cross-state issues where emergency services work pretty well, and we got that well pretty down between counties and jurisdictions, but when it comes to the cross-state kind of communication. So we are in a dialogue now with NDOT and Caltrans and a number of other stakeholders, the two states' emergency management groups, to really improve some of the protocols there. So those, I'm just making you aware of that. So as we look at information systems and what will help with dispatch or emergency dispatch. Some of the other, one of the last couple of things that I am becoming more aware of is we pilot paid parking on 28 and the issue of enforcement there. What we are beginning to realize is some of the statutory authority that's given to jurisdictions about fines and things like that aren't applied uniformly when you go from one jurisdiction to the next. And so that's something that we are anticipating maybe a future statutory change that would help, I think the term came up yesterday to you know, kind of harmonize some of our abilities in the basin to make that more uniform, eventually all the way around the lake. It would be helpful to us to be able to then inform our traveling public of these things, and so that we can create kind of the expectation. Those are some more future aspects that I would anticipate that could be as early as next committee that we could be bringing forward that would be helpful as we learn more and are in a more position to articulate the kinds of changes that would be, we think are necessary. Thank you.
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. Julie Reagan, Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. I would just add and build on what you heard from Mr. Hasty. One of the key barriers that we're still researching different feasibility options is that multi-jurisdictional issue. For example, in the parking space that Mr. Hasty just mentioned, you have multiple land ownerships. So we're in deep conversations with our Forest Service partners and state lands, state parks, private operators, the counties, if we could go to more seamless, technology-based solutions. We have multiple kiosks for beach entrances, for example. The traffic queues, would it be possible to do away with those and have more card reader technology that would instantly send dollars to the appropriate land manager for that? There are laws on the books that we have to explore that we might need to take a look at to facilitate something like that. Because honestly, when someone comes to Lake Tahoe, they're not really clear that they're in a Nevada State Park versus Emerald Bay or Bliss, California State Park, or a Forest Service managed beach at Nevada Beach or Pope Beach at the Y. And so those are the conversations we're having. And it's very technical and complicated, but there may be work to do that we might ask for your help in terms of legislative fixes down the road. So appreciate you highlighting that. Thank you.
Thank you for that primer on potential future issues we'll need to address. That you triggered another question for me on the technology on the phone and accessibility. Ms. Reagan, you had mentioned that in your initial discussion. Can you give us is it an app? Is it a website? What is it that we can blast out there for you to help folks get connected to how you're currently communicating with everybody?
Thank you for the question, Chair Peters. Julie Reagan with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. Yes, there are apps, and it goes beyond that. There's a cottage industry in travel demand management. There are many different apps that we've looked at as a community. We've had seminars and summits with our private sector partners because we will really need the cooperation of lodging and the private sector to get the word out, including the visitors authorities who you'll hear from shortly. But there are examples that we can point to in other resort destinations that can instantly give you information. Oh, Sand Harbor is the parking lot's full and the beach is at capacity. Maybe here are 3 other coupons to other attractions that you could try. There are cities around the world that do that I'm familiar with. Amsterdam, the Van Gogh Museum has a live camera. There's an app that can show the queue around the building. Here, try this tour, a half an hour outside of the city, and they'll send you information on your phone instantly. So there are programs and companies that specialize in that, and we have a team that is working on that with the community to look at solutions. And parking is another. The Tahoe Transportation District has been looking at Park Tahoe, one app, universal for parking around the lake. And so there's a lot of obvious implementation work to be done on that, but we're looking at those technological solutions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Are there any other questions from the committee? Seeing none? All right. Thank you again so much for the presentation. We appreciate your time today. I'm going to go ahead and close agenda item 6 and move on to agenda item 7, presentation regarding the status of the Tahoe South Event Center and South Shore microtransit projects. And we have someone from the Visitors Authority. Hello. Please go. Thank you so much. Please introduce yourselves and proceed when you're ready. There is a mic button up there. I'm not sure if you've seen people poking at it. That is, yes. Go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. Lou Feldman, counsel for the Tahoe Douglas Visitors Authority, and Carol Chaplin is to my left, the president and CEO of TDVA, and we appreciate the opportunity to bring you up to speed on our progress with the multi-use event center that was made possible due to the legislative support that we have received in connection with amendments to the Tahoe Douglas Visitors Authority Act. So, press here to. Should probably
gonna-
change places here because you're much better at this than I am.
I'm going to ask our folks on Zoom if they can see the presentation yet. Can you let us know when that's up for you? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So this is an animation that will walk us around the building that is under construction and very exciting addition to the market. It is a multi-use event center that will accommodate up to 6,000 people for performing arts and 4,200 people for sporting events. The facility is about a $105 million project. We were very fortunate in that one of the longtime stewards of our South Shore, the Edgewood companies, donated the 5-acre site, which is adjacent to what is now Bally's Casino. It was Mount Blue, which is about a $10 million contribution. The facility is intended to accommodate a variety of activities in addition to the more traditional concerts, but youth sports, and Carol will speak in a little more detail. What you're seeing now is the interior of the concourse, where there'll be food service. This is a very high level of finish for what is, a small arena. But in addition to the more, traditional concourse features, there will also be a series of meeting rooms. So we're going to have public assembly, which will accommodate groups and conventions, as well as a horseshoe bowl, which we'll see in a minute, which will accommodate just about anything imaginable. Trade shows. We have a full ice surface, so we can have hockey, figure skating. We're looking forward to you folks coming up for the tour. When you walk around what you're seeing here, it's truly amazing. There is not a bad seat in the facility. We're up at the upper concourse where there will be skyboxes. There are 13 skyboxes, half of which have already been sold. The level of enthusiasm and interest is pretty overwhelming. So this is what a typical concert would look like. And in a moment, you'll, I think, see some sporting events. The skyboxes are up to your right. TDVA engaged a management company called Spectra OVG. They manage venues all across North America and have the relationships with the various companies to book the events. Here you can see the meeting rooms. The meeting rooms are going to be facing basically the area where Heavenly is. You can look out here and see incredible views. I mean, it's going to be truly stunning. The supply chain issues have sadly impacted us to a fairly significant degree. While the project is generally proceeding close to on schedule, unfortunately on budget, there is electronics that need to be delivered, in particularly a switchgear. A switchgear manages the 8,000 amps of electricity that needs to be distributed to these various components. And that is causing a significant delay. That won't arrive until April or so. We were hoping to be open by January of next year, 2023. And so it appears now that it will be early summer of 2023 when we're able to host our first event. This gives you a view of the site plan, and what has been constructed is basically outlined in the Tahoe South Event Center as proposed, is actually there now. We'll show you some photographs in a minute. We've also reconstructed the parking lots that are identified both behind and adjacent to the event center, and that green area is the event lawn. The event lawn won't be completed, but is in the process of being graded as we speak. This is a great view coming from the casino core towards Nevada. And this will be the primary pedestrian entrance for the core. Again, a shot of what an entertainment venue would look like. This is full-size hockey. We can also accommodate basketball, volleyball, youth sports, wrestling, tournaments. There's electronic gaming tournaments. I'm not quite sure what those are, but they seem to be very popular. This is a real-time look at how we are progressing. This is Highway 50. This is the rear, and on the upper right-hand side, those bays that you see are the windows that will be available for those meeting rooms. And this will be the back of house as well. When you look at this from the other side of the street with Bally's to the right, you can see there's overhead utilities that will be undergrounded after Labor Day of this year, and so there'll be a nice scenic enhancement as a result of that. This depicts the gateway into the core, so this will be the gable entrance that people will see as they come in Highway 50 to the casino core. I think I'll pass it to Carol for a update on what type of activity is being generated in the marketplace.
Thank you for allowing us to come and update you. Carol Chaplin, Tahoe Douglas Visitors Authority. At this point in time, we have about $750,000 worth of business that we're talking to, if you will. Of course, we've had to, as Lou was saying, that we've had to move that out a little bit, and fortunately, some of that business has moved to 2024. We've had interest from the Globetrotters. We've had interest from NIAA, which is the National Interscholastic Athletics Association, with wrestling, basketball, volleyball. We've had cheer tournaments or meets, if you will, have interest. Blue Man Group, which some of you might be aware of from, I saw them in Las Vegas. There's something called Paw Patrol. It's a little, I'm past my prime for Paw Patrol. I think I was in Power Rangers, but Paw Patrol is new, and that would be a children's show. We also have interest from our local Seroptimus Club for their big fundraiser, and this is kind of a game changer for some of our service organizations who have kind of outgrown the casino venues for their fundraisers, and now we're able to give them a little bit bigger venue. We also have the Society of Outdoor Recreation Professionals for their National Outdoor Recreation Conference. That has moved from 23 to 24. National Wildlife Conference, and of course concerts and other events. So really you can see that the recreation and the outdoor groups are going to be big. Meetings and conventions. We're talking to a large convention right now for 2024. And what it allows us to do is really the intention is to host a lot of these events during our off-peak seasons, which would be late September through November. Actually, volleyball is November, so sometimes we can't find a reason for November to be on the calendar in South Lake Tahoe because the weather is, starting to change. And then wrestling and basketball February. And a lot of these other conventions are October, which is typically a slow time of year for us. So really that's our main focus. In addition to that, our summer season, our permit with TRPA limits us in the number of attendees that we can have, and that's for good reason. First of all, we wouldn't want to go head-to-head with another event like the Harvey's Concert Series, which can host up to 10,000 people. And then it comes back to that vehicle miles traveled, which we'll get into with the microtransit that is also required for the event center. Did I segue?
I think you were perfect, as usual. So part and parcel of this project included the permit condition to bring to the South Shore microtransit. Obviously, if you have an event facility, it's going to generate some visitation and vehicle miles traveled, and the TRPA and other interested parties collaborated with TDVA to come up with a program where we could offset the increase in traffic, and microtransit was the agreed-upon solution. As you've already heard, it's been hugely successful in North Shore and in other venues, and is actually something that the visitor is now, I think, expecting in resort areas. It's a free-to-the-user system, and obviously it benefits air quality and water quality, and quite frankly, the visitor experience in general. Not only that, but the resident experience, because it will reduce congestion. And in this particular instance, this is app-based, so the broadband discussion earlier is certainly, one of our inherent challenges. But you, like Uber or Lyft, you take out your phone and you identify where you are. The driver will pick you up. It's curb to curb. And it will coordinate with existing services, including the fixed route operated by TTD, as well as the Heavenly Shuttles. And at North Shore, and these are older numbers, but kind of out of the blocks, they had over 100,000 riders, and 56% of those were local and 44% were visitors. At South Shore, we would anticipate perhaps a little different split because there's a larger visitor population. This is the proposed service area, which is actually much larger than was originally anticipated. And we have, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, a little bit of a struggle with Douglas County, the county in which the event center resides. As you can see, the service area is disproportionate in the sense that California is a much larger component of the service area. And the question that has been asked by some folks on the Douglas County Board of Commissioners is, why isn't it greater in Nevada? And the answer to that is the bed base is in California. The density of resident population is in California. And so the most bang for the buck in terms of reducing vehicle trips is to provide this service in the most dense area, and that area wants to go to the core. So the expectation is we will significantly, over time, expand the service area. But out of the blocks, this is going to achieve what the permit conditions require, which is to offset the increase in vehicle miles traveled due to activities. To me, this is my favorite slide of many slideshows I've had the pleasure to present. We have never seen 20 partners step up to help make something happen, including public and private. So you've heard Barton Health has beginnings of a campus on the Nevada side. Barton, the League to Save Lake Tahoe, Heavenly, the community college, certainly the casino core, smaller businesses, marinas, 20 partners, including the city of South Lake Tahoe and El Dorado County, have stepped up to contribute $600,000, which is half of the operating budget. And in connection with the approval of the event center, Douglas County had agreed to participate in the funding and, quite frankly, was expected to really be the predominant financial partner. From time to time, elections occur and constituencies change. But the Tahoe Douglas Visitors Authority Act, and this is critical, and we will hope to be talking to you about this more in the future, requires 1% of the transient occupancy tax that is raised in the Tahoe Township, which equates to about $1.2 million a year. It requires that to be spent statutorily on transportation at the lake. When the event center was approved, the Douglas County Board of Commissioners passed, and there's a typo here, but Resolution 2020 should be -037, obligates the county to contribute up to 0.5% of the TOT, in this case $600,000, for microtransit. The increased sales tax revenue to the county from bringing all of these folks from California to Douglas would also generate new sales tax to Douglas County. And while we have presented to the Douglas County Board of Commissioners requesting their contribution. They have withheld that to date. And we hope to go back soon. We're trying to be on a near agenda. They are aware of the $600,000 contributed by these array of stakeholders and are expressing reluctance to match that because the service area doesn't include sufficient geography on the Nevada side. And if you look at the Nevada side, we don't have the density, we don't have the bed base other than in the casino core where there are 2,250 units. And the ridership opportunity captured by the proposed service area. So it's a little bit frustrating. But I wanted to show that the event center has inspired some additional development directly across the street. So this is a new project that is before TRPA for project approval in the not too distant future called Latitude 39. It's a 40-unit, I think very architecturally impressive whole ownership opportunity with food and beverage at grade opposite the event center. This would be a view looking back towards Heavenly Up Lake Parkway and across from the Edgewood Golf Course. This will have stunning views across the golf course into the lake, and is probably another $150 million of economic activity in the market area. The event center permit does not obligate microtransit to start until the summer of operations of the event center, but the partners that were identified earlier, along with, of course, TDVA, wanted to bring this to the market sooner. So we're prepared, in fact, it's almost serendipitous. The service is starting today, and it's starting with a proposed year-round service. Originally, or the permit requirement is summer only for the first 3 years, then summer-winter for years 4 and 5, and then year-round in year 6. We're actually 7 years ahead of schedule with year-round service, again, subject to building out the budget. We're halfway there, and we have this $600,000 shortfall, which coincidentally is what would be allocable under the money that can only be spent by Douglas County for transportation projects at the lake. And hopefully we will overcome this political hiccup. And if we are unable to do so, the service would actually have to terminate in January of 2023. We're looking for other fallback opportunities, but the 1% of the TOT will help us grow the system, and an additional component to fund an expansion of the system is when the event center commences, there's a $4 ticket surcharge that is dedicated to microtransit, and so that will further build the budget. Today we have maybe 4 vehicles programmed with a 5th as a backup. We'd like to have 15 vehicles and provide this service at least through Zephyr Cove, as well as into El Dorado County. And just one, I think, really wonderful achievement from El Dorado County. El Dorado County is outside the service area, and the Board of Supervisors for El Dorado County allocated $200,000 for this first-year service, even though they don't get any service, because they too believe that this is going to help alleviate the congestion and build the service where it'll serve Myers as well. And we hope that that will inspire other partners to step up. And I'm going to pass it back to Carol.
Thank you. One last, Carol Chaplin, Tahoe Douglas Visitors Authority. One last comment I would make is the South Shore Transportation Management Association, which Ms. Reagan had referred to earlier. We are led by Mr. Teixeira, who's in the back of the room. He's our chair for that group. I sit on that board. And as Lou had mentioned, this is really unprecedented group of people that have come together. It's a great story about the number one issue that we feel like, well, there's a couple issues, but one of the issues that we see that could be transformational on the South Shore. And we have an app that is is live today. I'm going to be taking my first ride on microtransit this afternoon to our South Shore Transportation Management meeting. So call me later and make sure that I got there and I got home. Would you? But it is an amazing process that we've had for the last year and how quickly it's come together. So hopefully at a future time we can come back and tell you how successful that's been. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so
Happy
much.
to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, I think the larger question that has yet to be answered is, will Douglas come to the table as they said they they would? And what does it look like if Douglas chooses not to? So we'll keep in touch with you about that and come up with some kind of solution to make sure you guys are able to keep this whole. Because as you mentioned, El Dorado County, it's, and I think I mentioned this at our last meeting, the economic vitality of Tahoe is not siloed. It impacts the whole region, and how everybody is able to get to their jobs, enjoy the beautiful outdoor spaces we have, enjoy some of the best food in Nevada and parts of California, in the Tahoe area, to enjoy some of the most beautiful staycation areas that we have available to us in our region, and as well as supporting some of the other interconnections between the tourism draws in Reno and those in Tahoe and other areas. So I look forward to hopefully a change in tune and mind of Douglas County, and maybe there's something we can do there.
Thank you very much.
Are there any questions from the committee on this presentation? It was a beautiful facility. We were really looking forward to trying to get up there for a tour this time around. We weren't able to make that happen this meeting, but in the future, I'd like to bring up members from this committee, obviously invited, but also some members who might be interested in visiting some of these areas and the Marlette Lake system and Tahoe system that they don't always get to go check out. It's a beautiful day trip and makes for some wonderful conversation. So I don't see any other questions from the committee. Thank you again for your time. We're very excited to see this up and running and to start seeing some of the awesome events that come to the region as a result of it. We're going to go ahead and close agenda item 7 and move on to agenda item 8, an update on challenges and recommendations related to the affordability of housing in the Lake Tahoe Basin. We have Ms. Drum here with the Tahoe Prosperity Center to prime us up on this discussion. Please introduce yourself and proceed when you're ready. There's a little button that says mic on it. There you go.
Thank you, Chair and members. Thank you also for calling me Miss Drum. Good afternoon, or good morning. I guess we're not quite at afternoon yet. I wasn't sure what time, so this worked out good. I'm Heidi Hill-Drum, and I am the CEO of the Tahoe Prosperity Center. Thank you for including us today in this presentation and this meeting. And while I will be talking about housing affordability, as you've heard from almost every presenter today, housing is economic development. So this is very critical to all of the project success that you've heard from all of the other presentations as well. Okay, I'm a Mac person, so. Babe, thanks, guys. Close that one. And you. And slideshow. That work? Yeah, awesome. Okay, good.
Hold on a second. Can you guys see this on Zoom yet?
Thanks.
Perfect, thank you.
So just a little bit of background again. The Tahoe Prosperity Center is the regional nonprofit organization acting as the community and economic development organization for the entire region. So California, Nevada, North Shore, and South Shore. So we were formed at the recommendation of the first study of our economy, the Lake Tahoe Basin Prosperity Plan in 2010, which Steve DeShara and many of the other folks here in the room participated in and supported. And we were set up as a regional nonprofit organization so we could work as partners with all of our jurisdictions, with our business and chamber leaders, with our community and philanthropic institutions, as well as others in the region. And we ground all of our work in data, but also in triple bottom line focus. So the community, the economy, and the environment in balance. So the projects that we work on, the solutions that we propose, we want to make sure that they're keeping those in mind, and that we are not just doing economic development for economic development's sake, or that we're hurting the community or the economy in any of our projects. So everything from more robust internet, which you heard we need for transportation and intelligent transportation systems, the alert fire cameras, I'm sure you're familiar with those. They have protected our region from more than 100 local fires that were put out by our firefighters before they reached 1 acre in size. And again, given the significant economic impacts that we've had with the Caldor fire, the Angora fire, and other things, they're obviously important for economic prosperity. But I am here today to talk a little bit about our housing work in the region. And as I've mentioned, housing is critical for economic vitality. There are 3 housing subregions in the lake that have had housing studies just recently completed. The first one that was done was the North Shore, California side. That was done by the Mountain Housing Council. The other 2 subregions were coordinated and facilitated by the Tahoe Prosperity Center directly, and that is the South Shore Housing Needs Assessment and Associated Action Plan, and the Washoe Tahoe portion, which is the Incline Village and Crystal Bay portion of the lake. We completed the housing needs assessment for them last year, and we're in the process of helping with their action plan and strategies currently. It's important to ground our housing policy changes and recommendations in data. So all of these reports tell us how many units are needed, at what price point. Do we need 1-bedroom units? Do we need 3-bedroom units? Do we need small homes, bigger homes, et cetera? So all of these plans that you see here before you share that data. I left this slide in even though it's just specific to the South Shore, but the nice thing about the South Shore study is it included both Nevada and California. So we did, again, cross-regionally, we looked at the housing needs for that community, both sides of the lake. And while 3,290 units were identified as needed to catch up and also meet our employment demands through 2026, 57% of those units need to be under market, so 1,880 units in this case. Sadly, our housing development in the Lake Tahoe Basin has only crept up each year at about a 1.35% increase, which is 661 units over a decade, which is about 66 units a year. That's all we're building. And I'll be honest, 95, maybe 98% of those are not affordable. So they have been luxury second home developments, condos, and large single-family homes that are not affordable to the local workforce. On the North Shore, the Mountain Housing Council study on the California side and in Truckee identified over 9,000 units needed in that region, and our Washoe Tahoe report identified 1,200 units needed over the next 5 years. Again, that's both catch up with existing housing needs, because that 1% growth rate has not kept pace with what our local housing needs are, and future demand given the current job market and outlook for our region. I also want to share, because there was so much of a focus on transportation, and that is being a solution for some of the housing issues today, is that our Washoe Tahoe business leaders have a current survey that they've got out to all of the employers in that community. Again, Incline Village and Crystal Bay is the Washoe Tahoe portion. And they've asked those employers if transportation might provide an option for some of their employment needs. So they would be then looking to provide some transportation options for their employees coming up from either Reno or Carson City and other communities. So the business community is looking at providing some transportation for their employees that they haven't had to do until recently. So that's some progress that we're making there as a solution to not having the housing that we need currently. But I wanted to share some very specific recommendations with you today because first, we have growth limits in Lake Tahoe, so we know that we're not going to be able to build 10,000 units of housing in the next few years, given our protection of the environment and the other things that we need. But what we do know is that the primary focus for any housing development in Lake Tahoe right now needs to be focused on that lower income, affordable, missing middle type of housing. So housing for our employees in our tourism industry, housing for our teachers. I'm hearing more and more stories of teachers that are having to move further away from the community, police officers, firefighters, et cetera. So we want the primary focus of any housing solutions to be focused on that missing middle, as well as the lower income affordable housing. And although I would love it if there was a silver bullet to solve this crisis, there's not. So I have a few very specific policy suggestions for you all to consider today. And it's not just for you guys, it's for our local jurisdictions and our local agencies as well. So I'm beating a dead horse for them. They've heard me say these things over and over again, but I'm not sure if you guys have, so I'll go through these individually. The first is inclusionary zoning and in lieu fees. So for example, in the city of South Lake Tahoe, we have a new Hampton Inn hotel. We don't really have a need for new hotels in our community. We have more empty rooms than not for the majority of the time period over the year. But an inclusionary zoning policy would have required the Hampton Inn to provide either to build some units of housing for the employees that now that hotel will be hiring and using, or in lieu fees, which is a payment that goes into a housing trust fund or a housing entity that would then go into building new housing units for on that more affordable mark. So inclusionary zoning and in lieu fees are something that our region does not have. We feel it's a strong and important policy. I was just up in Truckee last night for Truckee Thursday, and there were TART Connect buses and minivans driving folks around and getting folks there. Truckee does have inclusionary zoning, so they have a significant number of projects on affordable housing that are happening in that region right now. So we see that it's actually working pretty well. Easier and less expensive ADUs. An ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. And I'll use my actual personal example. I have a home in Myers in South Lake Tahoe. It has a loft above the garage that we've used for my son's gaming equipment. So he goes over there to play Xbox, for example. And it's a loft above the garage. It's fully enclosed. It has heat. And we have considered adding a kitchen so that we could rent that out to a Sierra at Tahoe employee, for example, because we are on the Myers side close to Sierra at Tahoe Ski Resort. However, we are just outside of the half-mile of transit current incentive that is offered by TRPA for a bonus unit to turn that into a housing option. And sadly, it would cost us $60,000 to get the housing unit required to convert that little loft above the garage, plus obviously the funds that it would cost us to convert it and add the kitchen, et cetera. So it's definitely a barrier to adding more housing, especially in covered footprint that's already been existing on that property. So I use that as a personal example, not only because I am somebody who works in housing and would love to be able to convert that unit to something that would be useful, but I don't have an extra $100,000 sitting in my bank account to do that out of the goodness of my heart. So I share it because it's an easy and simple policy change that we think the local governments and the TRPA can potentially make to encourage development of housing in already existing footprints. And there are many, I feel like many units of housing like that have these lofts above garages or that have that opportunity to do that. They just don't meet the current incentives because the current incentives aren't really working. Development standards that lend to affordable by design. And these are things like per square footage fees versus set fees, no matter if you're building a 5,000 square foot home or a 1,000 square foot home. So per square foot fees would be a way to incentivize smaller units development, and those are more affordable by design because they are smaller footprint. So that's something that would also help. In this category, we also recommend some significant changes to height, roof pitch, coverage, and density, because each of those specific policy changes has implications for developers trying to make these projects pencil. Currently, the projects that pencil at the lake, as I mentioned before, are the luxury second home kinds of projects, not the lower income or the smaller tiny home type projects. Next up is designated funding for housing. We all know that the challenge of building anything, and you heard it just with the supply chain issues with the event center and other things, is that there's always a gap in financing needed, typically for housing projects, in particular affordable housing projects. The city of South Lake Tahoe just recently contributed about $2 million to the Sugar Pine Village project, which they were able to leverage that $2 million to access $60 million in federal income tax credit projects, grants rather, to build almost 300 units of low-income affordable housing. So that project should be breaking ground later this summer, and it will provide, again, approximately almost 300 units eventually of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom, more affordable homes in our community. And that one is also close to transit, so that will be a benefit for our tourism employees. But again, having designated funds for housing to help finance some of those gaps or to leverage future federal and state funds is something that's needed. And then finally, a regional housing entity. So we have a number of housing authorities in Nevada and California, but there isn't one just focused on the Tahoe Basin. This is something that was identified in the South Shore Housing Needs Assessment and the Action Plan. And a housing trust fund, again, can act as both that gap financing option, so when we find some options for funding housing, it can provide that funding, but it can also act as an entity that manages deed restrictions. And what we have found over the years is that the deed restrictions on affordable units are getting lost in the system, because some of them are managed by a county, some of them are managed by TRPA, some of them are managed by different projects and different developers over the years, and no one's paying attention to what's happening with those. So, for example, in Incline Village, we've identified a number of affordable housing units that were deed restricted, that were being sold on the regular market without noting that to the people who were buying that unit. So we've shared that information with the entities that are managing that, and they're working towards figuring that out. But in order to ensure that we don't lose the affordable housing that is deed restricted moving forward, a housing entity would help with that as well. So those are my recommendations and my final comments. I would like to share that we did just complete the Envision Tahoe Prosperity Playbook, which is our economic development strategy for the Tahoe Basin. Housing and transportation were both identified as foundational strategies to ensure future economic resiliency, but then we have 3 other areas that are very specific towards economic resiliency moving forward, so we're not so dependent on tourism in the future. But and I'm happy to share that with you guys at another time.
That would be great if you have a link to that report that you could share with staff, then they can share it around.
I'll definitely send that to Alyssa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions from the committee? This is a tense issue in Tahoe, and it has been for a bit. I think it's getting just exacerbated by the housing prices and the housing market right now. And And this ability to work from home, really anywhere, enabling people to move into communities that had historically not been accessible to those folks. It's different. Right? But appreciate your work. I don't have any direct questions for you. Thank you so much for coming with some options, some priorities for you guys. We really appreciate that, and we may follow up with you on those as BDR recommendations if that's something that they look like they would fit with our committee.
Absolutely.
On. So, all right, no question. Yes, please go ahead, Senator Settlemyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry about that. Just kind of curious what your thoughts were on counties coming up with bans on vacation home rentals and how that potentially affects affordable housing, because then that offsets where other individuals can go, and it kind of seems like a domino effect to me, potentially. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were.
Thank you, Senator. That's a great question. Again, Heidi Hildrum, Tahoe Prosperity Center for the record. And what we are actually evaluating that right now in the city of South Lake Tahoe. They have a ban on vacation rentals in certain neighborhoods. And our current data for the first few quarters of that ban is not showing a significant change from vacation rentals going into long-term rentals in the community. What we're finding instead is that those short-term rentals that you could previously rent for a week or a few days are now going into month-long rentals or ski lease, for example, rentals in the winter, so for 3 or 6 months time frames. So they're still staying as vacation rentals for the most part. They're not necessarily turning over into long-term housing for local workers. That being said, it's still early in the data. We do think that restricting use in certain areas of the community for vacation rentals makes sense. You would want more vacation rentals in your tourist core areas. You would want less further out. For example, where I live in Myers, after the ban in the city of South Lake Tahoe, we saw almost all of the up to the cap of vacation rentals suddenly went up. So there's more vacation rentals now in the county than there were prior to the Measure T ban in the city of South Lake Tahoe. But that's just more people on the road driving farther out from Myers into the tourist core area. So more traffic and other potential problems with that. So coordinating the bans or the restrictions or the zoning, for example, for some of those vacation rentals is a good idea. Again, we feel it should be coordinated across the jurisdictions because the impacts are then just pushed out a little further if you're not doing that. So,
Thank you, Chair.
Question.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, that's an interesting issue area up there, both South Tahoe and Incline Village. Yeah. I don't have any other questions, and I'm not seeing any from the committee. Thank you again so much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and close this agenda item with the intention to follow up. Thank you again. And we'll move on to agenda item 9, which is our final public comment for the day. I'm gonna go through a couple of housekeeping items around public comment. Please remember to state and spell your name for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes. We will time each speaker during public comment to make sure everyone has opportunity to speak. Again, to call in to provide comment, please dial 669-900-6833, and when prompted, enter the meeting ID 851-4772-2022, and then press pound, and BPS staff will indicate when it's your turn to speak. We have somebody at the table in Carson City, so I'm going to go ahead and let you proceed. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Steve Teixeira, and the last name is Teshara. And appreciate the opportunity. I attend a lot of presentations. I know you do as well. But in terms of Tahoe and complexity of the issues, I'm extremely proud of my colleagues today. They gave you a great presentation on a lot of very complicated issues. It was very distilled, it was very direct, and I know you appreciate it. I sure did, sitting in the back of the room. So I've been involved at Tahoe since the mid-'80s on regional planning issues. It's interesting to see how things have evolved and changed. I want a couple focus on a couple things that were said to you today. The need for the Tahoe Transportation District to have a general fund source. It's amazing what the district has done based on just using project monies, and it's very limiting. I served on the board of the TTD for a number of years, and so I'm very familiar with the challenges. And if the two states could provide some funding through TRPA, they could go to the TTD to help them, as you mentioned, Chair Peters, the need for professional capacity to do these kind of complex projects. It's really important. On the 777 approach, the goal here is to try to get as broad a consensus around an approach as possible. It's extremely difficult. But I think that a lot of progress has been made with the involvement of the states, the congressional delegation, the private sector, which I spend a lot of time working for and with, to get people to come along. And a lot of the focus is on what is it going to cost? What is the funds? It's about the investment, and it's about what do you get? What is the value? And if you had a 24/7 year-round transit system that went everywhere, to Miss Hildrum's point, she's just outside of the ability to be near enough transit to do ADU at her property. If you had microtransit expanding your transit services, that wouldn't be an issue for her. So the idea of having that, and then the other thing that I always think about is people, it's like, oh, it's kind of mundane, transit, buses, roads. But think about Tahoe's tremendous maritime history and the great vision of ferries, environmentally friendly ferries going back and forth. We're not going to build new roads, but the lake is a highway in of itself. So that's the vision I carry around. If people could see that and they could take that, they go, yeah, how much? I'll put in my share, whether I'm a business or a day visitor, whatever, I'll put in my share to have a vision like that, a truly world-class vision. So those are just some of the things I wanted to bring forward as you close out your day. I'm mindful of your performance obligation. I'm going to get back up to the lake to soft launch the microtransit service, and that's very exciting too. So thank you for your time and attention, for all the members, including those down in Las Vegas, and your staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trueshaw. Hey, real quick, before you hop away, can you give us the name of the app that you can
Yes.
download for the microtransit system in Tahoe?
Lake Link. And so if you go to the App Store and you put in Lake Link under the search, it'll pop right up, and you just press it, and it's there. So yes, please do.
With that being said, I thought it was, the other one was Tart Connect, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
that's the North Shore, and I have both on my phone. So Tart Connect is the other one, same process. You put in Tart Connect, and it'll pop up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for catching that. Yes, so we have two microtransit systems. They both have cell phone applications that you can use, similar to a Lyft application or an Uber application. Please download those as you head up to Tahoe Park and make yourself your way around the lake using those kinds of opportunities for leaving your car behind. Are there any? I don't see anybody else coming up in Carson for public comment. Is there anyone in Grant Sawyer for public comment? I'm not seeing anybody coming out from behind the big pillar. Okay, BPS, is there anyone on the public comment line that you can add for public comment?
Chair, the line is open and working, but there's no one on the line to give public comment at this time.
Thank you so much. Well, with that, before I adjourn, I just want to remind folks that our next meeting is our final meeting for the interim. It is scheduled for August 31st. We will include a work session where we'll consider recommendations and potential bill draft requests, or BDRs, for the 2023 legislative session. I will have staff working to develop those out. If you have ideas, please submit those earlier rather than later so we can make sure those BDR recommendations are as succinct as possible. And we are trying to make our work session fully accessible to the public. However, we would also like to take an opportunity to visit some of these lake areas that we haven't gotten to yet in this committee. So kind of to be determined on the schedule for the day and what that's going to look like and where we will have those meetings. So please stay attuned to our interim committee page online and look for that agenda as it comes up. Members, please know that recommendations are also open for you as well. If there are BDR recommendations you have for this committee, please send those in to staff as well. General public recommendations are also open to you. Please to go ahead and send those in to our staff. Again, at Tahoe at, I'm gonna look at my cheat sheet, lcb.state.nv.us. We are looking to have those all submitted by August 1, please, at 5 p.m. You are welcome to reach out to Ms. Keller with any questions for how to submit or what we need for those BDR recommendations. I hadn't heard anything today about the Tahoe Summit, but I did do a quick ask the other day on what the schedule is looking like. It looks like there was a press release recently. Graciously, Senator Rosen has announced that the Tahoe Summit will be at Sand Harbor this year on August 16th, starting at 9 a.m. There is limited parking, I hear, so please take advantage of these opportunities to use public transportation from Incline area, or I think that's the right one, right? Incline. Park and ride, guys, and we'll see you all there. With that, seeing no further business, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for being here.